everyone. So I'm very, very, very happy to announce that I have the Greek on my show. Also co-hosting is Daniel Sala out in Romania. Very happy to have you. Greek, you reached out to me, so people have a little bit of background context, because I am as you call, a seeker. And you would email and call and just load me down with such information. It would literally just stop the rest of my day. And I've never had anything, any information come to me that really made everything that I've experienced or seen or learned in life that much clear. It's so much mental clarity all at once. The things you would just volunteer to me, that it truly is mind blowing. And I think that what you're doing is on another level, which I'm sure you would think is sad, because humanity has been just dumbed down, or is this disposable race in so many words, as you would say. But if we could just jump right into, I have a channel that talks all about, space and the elites. Maybe if you could give a background on, I don't know, who's running the world, why, and TRB3s or something, we could start in that.
Right.
Anyway.
That's very broad. I don't need to. There's no introduction necessary for who I am. It's because it's actually, I'm kind of embarrassed to say 90% of what I'm saying, because it should be obvious to most, but it's not. I don't think there's any elite. And the TR3B throw in there, I think that would probably be brought up maybe 8 hours of conversation later, way down the road, because there's so many things in what's considered in the common framework, the reality framework of the mainstream human, that is lacking. That just, to talk about the advanced sciences and things like that is just way, way, way out. The amount of background that needs to be laid down for just basic human existence in any field is so lacking. And that's what I've been trying to put out to quote unquote other humans, if they're considered as such.
The basic human existence. We'll start there.
Oh, okay. Can you be a little more specific? Because
how did this, I guess, epoch get here, and why? Isn't this like the 5th time humans populated the Earth, or from what I've tried to gather, or?
Well, that's another big question. I don't want to seem evasive.
No.
Okay, I want to just go back. Maybe these are really big questions, and I'm able to answer 4 or 5 questions at the same time, and I just can't do it as such. So a little background. When we first met, I was looking at the internet, and I commented on one of the videos you did with Daniel Sala regarding the Busege Mountains discoveries, I think the Peter Moon book, so on and so forth, Romania, and the entire saga, which probably still continues. And you left a phone number. And what's interesting is when people leave a phone number, it harkens back to the old days, right? If you know what I mean. No email, no texting, you just call me on the phone, right? And we continued from there. One thing, just to throw out, I'm kind of evading the question that you asked about the human saga, because it's just so big that it has to be run backwards. People are so disconnected from even any basic knowledge of themselves, that to throw in where they came from and whatever it's kind of like the sprinkles on the cupcake, but there's no cupcake at this point, you see?
Yes.
So just to go back again, to be objective is very difficult, because you mentioned the TR3B and where we come from, as we continue, you'll see how fluid this reality is, and it's framed in another reality, let's say. But in the meantime, my vantage point is as if I'm visiting this planet taking notes, kind of scouting out what's going on. Actually, let me just give you a couple of paraphrases here and analogies. I'm doing this cosmic newsletter about what's going on the Earth. And it doesn't go to humans, it goes to others outside of the Earth, right? So it gets very interesting, because this is not something I'm asking people to believe. It's not meant for Earth people, and kind of reporting on what's going on here. And it's kind of embarrassing, let's just say, right? So why not focus on what people can do, what they can access, who they are, just basic knowledge here, because it's kind of hypocritical to discuss on what's going on Earth to others when the situation is so ridiculous. Take some time out and just go back to the humans and tell them, hey, you're missing about 99% of everything. So let me give you an example. There's something called tradition, custom, culture, right? And this is what you're getting trapped in all the time. For example, I am a heavy, not just critic, because just to criticize is not really good. So you have to give constructive criticism. Basically, if you point out something that's negative, you should have at least 2 or 3 positives to back it up and remedy the situation, right? And that's the vantage point that I always take. So let me give you an analogy of what's going on Earth without directly saying what's going on Earth. So visited this other world, and they have a custom there. Everyone on the planet, they put a thumbtack down on the seat or the chair before they sit. And they're fleshy beings, and it's actually very painful. So this entire industry was developed to develop this Kevlar or bulletproof underwear that everyone would have to buy. So they put this on, so before they sat on the seat, the thumbtack wouldn't penetrate and it wouldn't be so bad. So when I found out about this, I said, well, why don't you just stop putting thumbtacks on chairs? And they said, you're actually attacking our society by saying that. And not only that, when the companies that were making the Kevlar underwear found out, they wanted to, obviously get rid of me because I was now messing up their business. Do you see this analogy?
No, I understand that, and that in so many words, that's the whole reason why I'm just so upset. That's my main malfunction in life. That's why I sit and wonder and think at night. Is why these industries wouldn't want to start a new. Yes, there would be the death of, let's say, oil and gas, or the death of I don't know, windmills and all this stuff, because there is free energy, things like Tesla. But that would
Sure.
be new industries, and I'm sure they could, with their power and minutia, could stay on top of that. It's like, I feel we're being kept down by design.
Right. Well, that's much later on in the conversation, because what happens when you get into more existential topics, free energy, how many times we've been here, who we are, and all this, we're basically, I'm going to try to say this as kindly as possible, giving it to a juvenile mind that hasn't been conditioned, lacks the discipline and the information to do anything with the information. Give me an example. You walk into let's say a first grader elementary school, 6, 7-year-olds, there's 30 of them sitting, and you start discussing astrophysics. Let's say you're an astrophysics scientist, and you start discussing astrophysics with these 5-year-olds for an hour. And they're all sitting quietly, they're all very attentive. And after an hour, you say, does anyone have any questions? And they all raise their hands and they say, well, what's the question? Do you have any candy?
Completely irrelevant. Yeah, whole point.
Yeah.
Yeah, just.
You see, so these people are asking, in other words, that I see on the internet, one of the things I keep looking for is, on the who's pushing the fringe, right? And I found the videos that you guys did, I mentioned again on the book reviews that Daniel Sala did so well. And he actually did a bang up job, better than at most, about 99% of the stuff you'll ever find on the internet. Thanks. Because he framed it in a realistic way. Okay, so without getting on that, the humans at this point, they need to come up at least to a 3rd or 4th grade level, and then we can discuss energy problems on and on and on and on. And actually, by the time you get to the 3rd or 4th grade level, let's say I'm using let's say the K through 12 analogy, right, which is kindergarten through 12th grade, we can get an education also. But so the topics that must be covered, it takes a very long time to give the background, but you do it in shorthand, is everything about, for example, the human body, how it really works. That's kind of important because you spend most of your time in it. Your environment. Then you look into more mental systems like governments, religions, how to gather information, how to discern. And then they go back to the physical world. So these are the things that I've been discussing for over a decade, publicly and privately. I've kind of given up on doing it publicly, of course, because there's no audience for it. Again, there's the same reason there's no audience for, the people that buy the bulletproof underwear instead of just not sitting on the thumbtack.
No, there is.
But anyway,
we can't unite. That's the thing. I mean, with censorship and I guess angry or jealous or shitty people, it's, people like Daniel Sala and I, we want to come together. We want to sit. We want to
sure.
learn you. I understand you have just so much more information. I'm not here trying to kiss your ass or anything. I'm just saying, like,
no.
You are like the father figure I've always cared for that has all the information. And
all right. Let me just interject one thing. One thing that I kept hammering to you is go back and listen to there's a series online called Ocelli and the Greek.
Yeah.
And that's a brief overview of stuff that I did a while back. None of it is scripted. There's no outlines. Right? Actually, if I'm not going to get compensated, I'm not going to sit down and write an outline or a script because it takes a lot of time because you have to provide everything, which I wanted to maybe drop some images in if we continue. I don't know how long we want to go. And it doesn't seem like I feel sorry for the listeners right now because we've been on for a few minutes and it doesn't seem like I've said anything. So, so let's maybe get into it. Pick a topic,
Okay,
and
you mentioned
any
you
topic.
out with I'm assuming an elite, and they had the silver tube with the map about crossing the Atlantic. Can we start there?
That's way down the road. That's way down the road.
I prepared some stuff if you want.
Yeah, Danny.
Sure.
Well, you mentioned I only got to 3 or 4 of your Chile videos, or I should say podcasts, but I did take some notes, and one of the things you brought up was that it all comes down, this human life, to the quality of food, clothes, and shelter.
Yes.
And would you say that, well, I wasn't quite clear on the clothes part. Was it just aesthetic, or was it comfort, or was it something else?
The food, clothing, and shelter. Because the first thing would be food sustenance, and then there would be clothing, because we're the only quote unquote beings that don't have any covering, right? You see the deer, the horse, the cow, the monkey, they're all born, they're ready to go, right? They don't go shopping for clothing. So comfortable clothing, and then shelter, of course, because the elements are very harsh to us. So
Right.
let me just interject one thing. A lot of people, this is a catchphrase that I use to see who can be drawn into going to the next level. And what I mean by that is some people say to me, Greek, that sounds too basic. That's so simple. It sounds like it's irrelevant because it's so simple. I said, yes, it is. And it's on purpose, because if you're seeking the highest quality foods, the intake, the highest quality clothes and shelter, of course, that you want to afford and have access to, in that journey to find the highest quality of those things, you will learn so many other things that you will become more all-encompassing.
That's basically what it comes down to, like I would guess, and is actually synonymous with learning what makes you healthy, right, in life.
That's another thing, healthy. That's there's no such thing as being healthy. There's different levels of health depending on what you're doing in life. For example, if you want to go climb the tallest mountains, you're going to have to develop a type of health that will allow you to do that, right? If you're going to be a mountain climber, if you're going to be a professional, let's say, bicycle racer, that's a different type of health. If you're just going to be sedentary, then sitting back and watching TV and drinking beer and junk food is just fine, right? So when you say healthy, what are you trying to do with your body? What part of the world, what are you doing? If you want to be a construction worker, let's say, that's a different level of health. If you have a bad back or bad feet, you won't be able to do that, you see?
Well, my definition,
yeah, go ahead.
My definition of health is being able to think with perfect clarity. I mean, with maximum clarity. And it does, the way I see it, depend on all these things like food and shelter. And it is not a multitude of things. The way I see it is one, variable.
Okay, let me just interject. To have clarity, let's just say use the visual analogy. If you want to see with a far perspective and someone just comes a few meters in front of you and pulls up a black shade or a blanket, it cuts off your vision, right? And you're being blocked. So that opaque block or veil, let's say, is the cultures and traditions that people are engrossed in and you've been raised in. Once you remove that, and you could see through the cultures and traditions, and what you're being told from a young child on any topic doesn't make any sense, you will spend a lot of energy moving that veil to the side so you could see beyond it. And it's it's so easy to do that when I see people not do it, I see it as a form of extreme laziness, stubbornness, rebelliousness. And it's very obvious. Here, let's just make this a video about secrets. Let me give you some standard Greek speak stuff that I usually steamroll people with, okay?
Okay.
So what I've been doing lately is, for the past few years, I stopped now. I used to call the physics department and the air conditioning and heating contractors, and I used to ask them, I said, how many people called you yesterday about developing devices that make a rising cold and a descending heat for their cars, planes, boats, and their homes so that they don't have a hot head and cold feet? And they don't even know what I'm talking about. I said, really? You don't have any demand? You see, because in natural systems, the cold rises and the heat descends, right? If you're in the valley, it's hot. You go up to the mountain, it's cold. And if you call a medical technician, calling them doctors is really not due, and you call him and he can't see you and you say, I have a hot head and cold feet, he doesn't need to see you to say you're not feeling well. So in all natural biological systems, the cold is rarefied and it rises, and the heat is densified and it descends. So how many Earth inhabitants are calling their technicians to demand devices for climate control that make an ascending rising cold and a descending densifying heat, so they don't have a hot head and cold feet and they have a more healthful condition? I know this is a secret, don't tell anyone, please, right? That in nature, cold rises and heat descends. If that secret ever gets out, we're in trouble, right? Well, we might be censored. You see why my sarcasm is due in this one, right? We can go into, for example, timekeeping. There's a form of navigation, whether you get out of bed and go to the bathroom or the kitchen, or whether you're traveling across the world. In order to navigate, you need to know your distance, your speed, and your time, okay, to do it properly, or to be able to record it or document. We have an element of something we call time. Some people say it does exist, some people say it doesn't, whatever. Actually, time does not exist. What we call as time is the recordation of events. When we record events, we use a nomenclature, just like we have the metric system in the English system, we use time. And that's all. When people say it doesn't exist, it's actually a method of recording an event. So here, when you look at the entire world being on what I call sarcastically the Pope's work schedule, which is Monday through Friday, January through December, they always give an out. You know, when you take a multiple choice question and answer test, you have the question and you have 4 possible answers. Now, hopefully no one here is ignorant enough to think that all those answers are true. You have to pick one of them, right? Well, so the number 4 comes up very reasonably, and most everyone is failing, because if you look at septem, it means 7. Octo means 8, like octopus and octagon. Novum means 9, and December means 10. But everyone is writing it as September as 9. You see, October is 10, and so they're giving it, and no one is paying attention.
No, so we taught in school that we had Julius Caesar stick in June and July. You see, like, to mess that up.
Yeah.
That's what we're told.
Right. But what happens with this? It's coded. It's a code. So when someone says I'm an atheist, you ask them what day it is, and they tell you anything between Monday through Friday or January through December, they're Catholic. It's code. It means like they're okay with the Pope. They don't know it. You don't have to know it or not. I'm not saying you shouldn't be okay with the Pope, even though it is a ridiculous institution. The far side of it is when you're a human, let's say, moving around on this planet, and you are basically on a celestial body. The shape of it is irrelevant. The lawful way of keeping time, when I say lawful, is astronomical. What I mean by that is it doesn't matter when you live. If you measure time astronomically, no matter where you are, whoever you're communicating this time frame to in the future, they will comprehend it, right? So what I sarcastically laugh at, what the clock is, I call the wind-up toy, known as the mechanical clock, and then the Pope's work schedule. So it's very simple. If anyone here is old enough to remember, years ago, I'm going to bounce around a little, before the electronics banking conventions, if you deposited a check in the bank after noon, after 12 o'clock, they counted it as the next day. If you go to the astronomical university curriculums and astronomical timekeeping, or if you go to the Greenwich Mean Time website or the Naval Observatory, these are the timekeeping references. They tell you the day starts at solar noon, and they even are sarcastic about it. They say for scientific and astronomical reasons, but for the people, it's midnight. That's like saying back in the early days when let's say Webster's dictionary, they weren't sure on how to structure definitions. They had a little bit of sarcasm in there also. If you looked up the word oats, it said oats, which is a grain. It's what we feed horses in England, but it's the staple of the people of Scotland, basically comparing the Scots to their horses. And this is being done constantly. You could see the sarcasm. in society. Okay, the other thing, you mentioned Julius Caesar, we can get into that. Also, your month, I'll give you an example. For thousands of years, people settled their debts with the full moon. The full moon is the new moon. I can explain why, not the dark moon, maybe on another time. So they settled their debts with the full moon when it came around. It rises in the east like the sun and all that. That is the new moon. That's when the month starts. Actually, if you look at the Pope's work schedule and the calendrical system, they kind of are very similar. That's why today, when you have, let's say, what they call bills for utilities and other things, don't you get a monthly bill? Don't they ask you to settle your bills still traditionally with the monthly? Get it? Okay. So everything has drifted off. Here's something that's completely ridiculous, and how the population is being made fun of, just like the people of Scotland being compared to horses. They have this thing called a blue moon or something, where you have 2 full moons in a month. That is so stupid. That is such an oxymoron, because the actual moon defines when the month starts and ends. It's not possible. It's astronomically and lawfully impossible to have 2 full moons in 1 month. And it's just a way to make fun of people. And after a while, it's kind of like, you ever see when a young child's being bullied and you just can't take it anymore and you have to step in?
Yes, you just get fed up with frustration, like that's it, and then yeah,
Right, and yeah. So I just mentioned the differences in the temperature directions, how they move in natural biological systems, whether it's plant, animal, or the atmosphere. No one is paying any attention. No one is paying attention to timekeeping. We can go on and on and on and on and on about all subjects. Religions are very important also, because right now you're under what's called the entire world. If you look at the historian, I'm not going to get into it too much, but the history of the earth, which is written basically by atheists, academics. Most academics are atheists. How do I know? Well, just ask them. They tell you. The historians, they call this the Christian era. The Christian era. Well, wait a second. If the atheist historians are labeling that we live in the Christian era, whatever, 2022 AD, don't they do that, right? And BC? It's not a religious thing. But if you've never heard of Christianity and you run over to what it is, even like Lao Tzu said, this world is run by not by words and laws and knowledge, but by symbolism. When you are first visiting this planet and you find out that their academics are calling it the Christian era, the first thing you're going to notice is this Christian symbol, right? You know, the crucifix and all that, right? So you're not from here, so you're reasonably intelligent. So you're going to say, well, where does this supposedly come from? And they all say it comes from the Bible, and then of course you'll see history. And so you go ahead and you read the Bible, and you see that this has something to do with a very specific entity known as Yahweh. And he basically, the whole Bible is very simple. He says, there are all these gods that all these nations are following, and I don't have a nation for myself. So he goes to Abraham and he says, hey, look, your descendants are going to be my people. They're going to have an allegiance to me, right? And he says, okay, bet, let's do it. That's what it's about. So if you're not part of that, it's got nothing to do with you. It's a hijacked document. Anyway, as you go further on, one of the supermen, let's say, or super being that's going to be sent to the earth through this lineage to show mankind what happens after you die eventually, is known as the Christ, and who is, you can dub as Yahshua ben Joseph, or on and on. And what's interesting, his name is Yahshua, and I don't know why they call him J-E-S-U-S, because the 6th book of the Bible is the book of Joshua. They should just call him Joshua. So calling him J-E-S-U-S right away is another code to show that no one is paying attention and they're just going for whatever they're told to do. So the first thing you should say is you need to make a correction. There is no J-E-S-U-S. You already have the book of Joshua. Just call him Joshua. That's his name, Joshua ben Joseph. But no, we can't do that. So here's the other thing. They show you this guy nailed to a cross wearing a diaper, right? That's the Christian symbolism. But remember, we're not from here, so we're reasonably intelligent. So we go back and we read the biblical text, and they have this thing, they somehow divided it in the end, and they call it the New Testament. But since we're reasonably intelligent, we're reading this document, and we notice that it's framed in time. In other words, the beginning of the book is older than the end of the book, right, usually. So as we go through, we realize, reading this document, that as we get to what they call the New Testament, that's more like the graduate level study of the Bible. In other words, like the beginning is the kindergarten, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. Right as you get to the middle, you're in sixth grade. And as you get towards the end of the Old Testament, beginning of the New Testament, it's kind of like high school. And when you get to the part that talks about this Yahshua ben Joseph or Yahshua the Christ, you're on a college level. So what they're doing to the people is telling them, just ignore the rest, go to the college level. So now you end up being, remember the lecture with the astrophysicist, right? And you asked, do you have any questions? What did they all ask, right? Do you have any candy? Mm-hmm. You see, so it's kind of like they're telling people to go read college, graduate level stuff when they're illiterate. So let's just give up the sarcasm, Greek, and get to the point. Even if you've never read the Bible and you just watched the movies and heard the stories, that time of Judea, they were occupied by the Roman Empire, okay? And the Roman Empire had put as prefect governor of Judea Pontius Pilate. So make a long story short, this Christ figure, Yahshua, was arrested by the Judean religious authorities. Notice I'm not using the word Jewish, right? They're Judean religious authorities. They take him to the subjected king who was suzerain to the Romans, which then finally subjects him to the Roman Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate washes his hands of the matter when he's presented with the Christ. He brings out a bowl and he washes his hands. That is a symbol that Pontius Pilate was given the area book. Do you guys know what an area book is? Okay, when you're in the military and you're sent to a foreign country, they give you an area book that has a list of all the laws and customs of the people. So when you go there, you don't do something offensive to create an international affair, right?
Yeah.
So let's just say even further, Pontius Pilate was a self-professed historian and very close friends with Claudius Tiberius Caesar at the time, who was also a historian. So they were very interested in cultures and laws. So he knew the Judean law very well. So they brought the Christ to him and they wanted him killed, the Judean religious authorities. And his response to them was, I see no reason to kill this man for the reasons you give me. So I'm returning him back to you to use your law. You could read in the book of Mark and the book of Luke, you could preface what I'm saying. Remember, this is graduate level study also regarding biblical matters. So he says to the Judean authorities, I'm returning him back to you to use your law, your law. And the Judean authorities respond, how can we under Caesar? And he says, I am making this exception. I know you have a law. See, because we know that Pontius Pilate knew the biblical law because he brought out the laver to wash his hands. That's symbolic. When something bad is going to happen, you wash your hands to show that it's the part of the rules of the red heifer. But so let me ask a rhetorical question, which I'll also answer. Do the Judeans use Roman law or do they use the law of Moses? Ah, very good, the law of Moses, right? And she made this exception. Under the law of Moses, what is the capital punishment, the method of capital punishment? Stoning or lapidation, very good. So that's why when you read the people passed from the 6th to the 9th hour, doing what? There's no crucifixion. It's very, very simple. And this is like anyone in the 3rd grade biblical study would know this. And you have billions of people that think that the symbolism that they're showing them is accurate because they haven't lifted a finger, but they're so brainwashed that if they go to the document, it would be like giving the astrophysics textbook to the 5-year-olds. They just want candy after they spend 6 hours reading something they'll never understand with their perspective, you see. But let me get into this a little bit more. It's very simple. Now, the amount of detail that is in the Bible, if you are clear, is astonishing. And no one is talking about it.
Actually, I think there is one person. I don't know if you know Stan Tenen.
No. Never heard of him.
Yeah, he didn't know a lick of Hebrew, and he just one day decided he was a physicist by trade, and just looked at the Bible one day and tried to decipher it. And what he figured out was that it was written in an ancient alien language. There was no other explanation because he looked at the first sentence of Genesis, and what it turned out to be, and then the rest. But just the first sentence of Genesis contained volumes of information, and
yes,
he figured out that every single letter is actually just a shadow of a ram's horn, which is kind of the cross section of a toroid, something like this. And
someone just to interrupt, someone else has brought up, for example, in English, if you read the first verse of Genesis, is in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, 10 words. In Hebrew, It's Bereshith bara Elohim et Hashemiyim vehet haaretz. There's 7 words, and basically it's beginnings, gods, plural, the group, a race of gods, formed, and the Aleph and the Tav, they don't translate that out. The Alpha and the Omega, they don't translate that, and then heavens and earth, right? So if you look, the most important thing to see in the book of Genesis, if you just bring up an interlinear, the first verse, they're not even translating the 4th word in there. There are 7 words, Bereshith bara Elohim et Hashemiyim vehet haaretz. They're not translating the center one. If you were to translate the center word, it's the Aleph, Tav, or the Alpha and the Omega. And the Christ said, I am the Alpha and the Omega. So basically, he's standing right there in the middle. So you don't have to get into ram's horns and shadows, because each one of those letters have numbers. And when you see how they're put together, they form a tree into forming the other books. Again, I've done discussions on this and other things, but it's pretty fruitless. Yeah, I just want to go back to the Christ story just for another minute, because it's very important. I know people know this has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with history, false flags, and all this. Like, for example, I compare 9/11 to Christianity. It's identical, the way the people's perceptions of it. So let me go. So the Christ, saying Greek, he wasn't crucified. What are you talking about? Yeah, well, he was killed by stoning, because if you read in Deuteronomy 21 in the law, a high crime, it's very shameful to die that way, usually when they hang you on a tree, okay? And we know it was an almond tree because we're reasonably intelligent. There's over 20 references to the almond tree from Genesis all the way through the prophets that something is going to happen, including the 7-branch lampstand that Moses was told to make in the likeness of the almond tree. So the people were passing for 6 hours doing what? Playing patty cakes, throwing dice, betting, or what? For 6 hours. They're throwing stones. 3 men on 1 almond tree. The Christ was front and center. He dies first. The men on the left and the right, they had to have their femoral arteries cut, because breaking the legs doesn't do it, right? Anyway, the Roman soldiers were casting lots for the robe that Herod had given him, because it was a king's robe. Why did they do that? Why were they casting lots? Because they were made aware of what happens when this ceremony happens, when someone is executed through stoning, nailed to a tree. What happens after that? Of course, no one knows, because it's published in the Bible. It's in the book of Numbers. Anything that hangs from a tree is accursed and to be burned. So everything was burned. So remember, Herod had given him his robe. So the Romans were like, oh, this is the king's robe. Who's going to get it? So they cast lots. So anyway, you see, that's why when Moses built the 7-branch lampstand, he said, make sure it looks like the blossoms of an almond tree. And what happens on top? You light fire. So anyone that comes around and tells you, here's a piece of the cross, here's a piece of this, it's just a laughable joke, right? It's like in 9/11 when they found the passport in the rubble, right? Or the inflated tire, the airplane tire, fully inflated on the ground, 100 stories down. So, but here's my point. And if anything, the stuff that I'm saying is for 8-year-olds. If you're older than 12, you won't be able to hear what I'm saying. This is for the young people to just open their eyes and see what's going on. Now, if you look at the rest of the story, that's why it was very important that he was condemned for many reasons. And his purpose to come here was not to teach anything. As a matter of fact, he even said that all of the people, the public, were following him. What did he do? He shunned them away and ignored them. As there's one scene there where he's walking with one of his followers, and this woman is walking with them almost the entire day, and he's ignoring her. And they ask him, why are you ignoring this woman? He says, because I didn't come for her, basically. He was the most hateful individual in the entire Bible. He kept saying to people, you'd be better off if you were in Sodom and Gomorrah. So he didn't come here for all the stuff that people think, to teach anyone anything, because he says, if you want to know, it's already been said. It's in Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. He came here to show what happens after you die, if you're chosen to be resurrected or reincarnated in this particular plane again. See, because everything else had been proven. They walked on water, they came out of Egypt, all these miracles, right? But what was in doubt was 2 things: the existence of angels and what happens after you die. And he came here to show that. And he didn't come here for everyone. He says it came for the lost tribes of Israel. If you translate that properly, it's those that have perished of Israel, not lost like I'm lost wandering around. Anybody got a map? Any clue where I'm going? No, no, no. The perished, the ones that have perished, you see. So the story, again, I compare it to 9/11 because if you look at really what happened in 9/11 and what people think of it, if you look at what a Christian will tell you, and I'm not harping on the Christians, I don't care. I'm not, you know, it just happens to be the dominant billions of people right now that have been misled, right? You see, so the reason I gave this is because everything that you're engaged in right now, so a lot of people might be, their ears are burning. Oh, why is the Greek talking about religion? I don't care about it. Everything is religion. Let's bounce to the medicine. I don't know, unless Daniel's got a question about what I said. You brought up a good point that someone else is talking about it, but sadly to say, it has nothing to do with what I've been saying.
Well, yeah, it's kind of a tangential question, but I am curious if you think that the Bible gods are Anunnaki, and
Yeah.
there's several like waves of them. And you said that you watched the Chinamar videos, and that one is kind of polarizing in the sense that it says that the initial role of humans and was foreseen by higher entities, and we were meant to be made and stuff, and that was 430,000 years ago. And the first wave of Anunnaki was totally well-intentioned, everything, and it was only the latter ones from a totally different offshoot planet that were more slavery-oriented. And would you say that these latter ones are the ones in the Bible?
Yes, yes and no. For example, you know, when you go to certain Middle East countries, you'll see a older wealthy man and he's got 42 children and 160 grandchildren because he has all these wives, right?
Right.
Very easy to do. Okay, well, multiply that as if you run into someone and he has 10,000 children and 1,000,000 grandchildren and they're gods. They're very, very populous. For example, the God of the Bible, Yahweh, is not an Anunnaki, but he's of a similar race, right? There are so many gods. I don't know, let's say I don't trust, if you said there's 7 or 8 billion people on the planet, those figures are held by the World Bank. They're the ones that manage those figures. Now, if you know anything about banking, their books are not very accurate, right? There's one set of books they show people and one set of books that they know. So let's say, for example, there are 7 billion people. There are 7 billion types of gods out there. So how many gods? You see, they're so populous, right? That it's almost impossible to, unless we're given information to find out more about them. They have to give us the information. So what I'm trying to say is I find it absolutely ridiculous on how everyone tries to lump everyone into, oh, well, Yahweh's really Enlil, or Yahweh's really, and that's like saying, you know, John Wayne is Mickey Mouse, or, you know, whatever, you know, they're not. They're completely different beings. There's so many of them that it's almost, they're so populous, and they're not this density, okay, which is not difficult, but certain groups in the military right now, they know that. There's military ops that could walk into your house and you don't even know they're there, right? So if humans can do that.
If they interact with us, doesn't that mean that they're capable of being in 3D as well as 4 and 5, making them multidimensional?
Yes. Well, actually, here's the thing that, again, that irks me. There's only one dimension in this universe, right? Each universe has one dimension. What happens within that one dimension is the being's perception. For example, you could look this up. As humans, even with the best eyesight, we see only 1% of what is actually happening in the light spectrum. 1%. And within the sound spectrum, we're seeing about 5% of what can be heard. You know, like a dog and cat can hear higher frequencies and other animals can see beyond our spectrum, okay? So they exist in that realm also. In other words, they're here, and it's only one dimension, but the density is different. Like, for example, you can't see infrared unless you have you can't see it in the night unless you put on night vision goggles that actually allow you to see that tool, right? But there are other creatures that can, you see, and the density, in other words, material or mass, is the same. This is another thing, just to bounce into this. When you look at atomic structure, what gives things mass, like right now, if you got up from your chair and you ran at the glass wall or the brick wall, you will get hurt, right? That you can't go through a solid object as you are right now because you don't understand what's going on, and you think that you've learned since a young child that don't touch the stove, it's hot, you'll burn. And you know as an adult that if you run to the brick wall, you're going to hit the brick wall, fall down, and probably get hurt, right? Give you an analogy. When in scientific matter, when they look at atoms, even the hardest material, let's say diamond, they'll tell you it's 99.9999% space. They say there's a proton and an electron, but it's all space. So how can the hardest material known be 99% nothing, space, right? Well, very simple explanation. Let's say you have a table fan, for blowing air, okay? Or a bicycle wheel. You have it on your table, it's not moving. You can put your hand right through the spokes of the bicycle wheel or your hand inside where the fan is and the fan blades, no problem, right? Once you get the bicycle wheel spinning or the fan, you plug it in and turn it on, go try to put your hand through it. That entire area that is moving acts as a solid, right?
And it's the same for planets. The faster the spin, the bigger the magnetic field.
Oh boy, you just stepped on something there. Magnetic field. Define a magnetic field. I'm not putting you on the spot.
Well,
you can ask a physicist, they can't do it.
The way I can only parrot like what I read, which is that it is kind of like the echo of a planet in time.
Okay.
It's imprint.
No. Okay, here's one way to think about it, very simple. I think Zan, we talked about magnets, and I broke it down on a third grade level and no physicist will understand, but a third grader will understand. Do you remember the analogy, Zan?
Can we do it again? Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. A magnetic field. Okay. Anytime you ask a physicist or a scientist what a field is or a wave, they just run away like morons that they are. A field is a qualitative thing. It's not a physical thing. A wave is also a qualitative thing. Like if I'm standing here and I'm waving at you, I am not a wave. A wave is what something does, not what something is. Mm-hmm. Okay? If I'm waving at you like hello or goodbye, am I a wave? That's ridiculous. And this is what they're saying, electromagnetic waves. Waves of what? Magnetic field, define a field, they can't. Okay, very simple. It's a quality thing. I have, iron is very common. I bet either one of you right now, if you got up from where you're sitting and walked around the street for about 10 minutes, you'll find a piece of iron on the street somewhere. Mm-hmm. It's very cheap. Nobody cares about it, right? And you bring it here and it says a piece of iron. So what? That's junk. Okay, because that's a qualitative statement. Now I'm going to take that piece of iron that you brought and I'm going to wrap copper wire around it and send a very high current through it. And when I remove the wire, if the current is high enough, that piece of iron will be able to stick to your refrigerator door and stick to other pieces of iron. According to material science, it's the same hunk of junky iron. Nothing has changed. What I changed was its quality. Okay, so what happens is when you see that electrical perturbance that goes on the iron, it creates a vortex through the metal. And if you're looking at it one way, it looks right hand. And if you look at it from the back, it looks left hand. Just like if you look at the top of a spinning ball, it looks left hand. In the same spin, go underneath, it looks right hand, right? So there's no poles on a magnet. Like for example, to say there's a North Pole attracts the South Pole, or there's a North Pole and a South Pole on a magnet is absurd, because if a North Pole attracts the South Pole and you have a bar magnet, well, they're already on the same bar magnet, they would attract themselves internally and make all magnetism an impossibility. It's absurd what they're saying. Okay, so what is a magnet? Another analogy, Zan, if you remember, a piece of iron is to a magnet what photographic paper is to light. When you have a photographic negative or a CMOS chip and you expose it to light, it exposes that moment in time, you develop it, and you have this beautiful photograph that, some photographers sell their wedding photos for $500-600, right? But it's just a crappy piece of paper that's worth nothing. But if you have a photograph, what is the difference between a beautiful photograph that sells at auction for $10,000 versus just a piece of paper? Nothing. Maybe a little chemical. It's the quality of the paper that's changed. So when you expose a photo negative or photo paper to light, you've captured that instant and it stays there until you erase it or damage it. The same with a piece of iron. When iron is subjected to a perturbation of the ether, perturbation means disturbance. Perturbation would be you have a still body of water and you throw a pebble in it and you see the ripples go out. Imagine doing that and the water freezes with the ripples in place. This is what a magnet is. It's very, very simple. But the other thing, that's interesting about a magnet. You have the fast part of the magnet, the outer part that you see. Then you have the counterspatial. If you will, a counterspace would be like a drain in a bathtub or a black hole. When you have a magnet in your hand, especially a simply loaded magnet, you're actually holding a portal in your hand. When I say it's portal, I mean the sci-fi space portals that you walk through and go somewhere else.
It's just a downscaled version of it. It's a less.
It's a very minimal downscaled version, a very, very subtle version. Just like if I said, when you watch the water go down the drain in your tub, that's a tornado. Well, hold on a second. If you say tornado, that thing rips buildings apart and lifts cows 1,000 feet in the air. How can you say it's a tornado? Well, it is geometrically. It's analogous to the same.
And is the macro version of that what's inside each planet, and the bigger version of that what's inside the suns, and the bigger version of that the big black hole in the center of the galaxy?
Yeah, the black holes no one has ever seen one it's like a wave. It's what something does. What happens is the space, the centrifugal part, you have the centrifugal which pushes out and the centripetal which goes in. That's why Newtonian physics doesn't work. If you look at all the Newtonian physics, they tell you an object in motion stays in motion and force is equal to what it's acted upon, and all this bullshit. They cannot explain vortex dynamics. If you, for example, spin a vortex in a 5-gallon bucket with water very fast, the outside of the bucket, you see the plastic wants to explode and break as if you have a bomb in there, but the center has got massive suction, right? So this has to be comprehended, that you have the fast part of the magnet, the same with a planet. That's why planets can never collide.
Yes.
Right? Because the equatorial part is the centrifugal and the centripetal part is in the pole. So what's going on with these fields? What the planets really are manifestations of the stars, but not that they come from stars. It's very difficult to summate. Like, for example, the hardest objects that you see, let's say a planet was made of rock. That rock was formed by the light and the energy from the sun. The finest, the most subtle energies form the hardest objects, and vice versa. Okay, but to get into planetary discussion, a planet, okay, if we're going to get into biology for a moment, which is very important, I think that was the crux of getting together a week ago, discussing getting into how the human body works. If you know what the mitochondria inside of a cell is, that's what a planet is. It has its energy core, and it has all the information for the environment that's on the surface. And one thing I mentioned also, if you look in the solar system, it looks pretty bare. That's because they're highly advanced societies. Well, let me just say this. When you're an advanced society, you don't live on the surface. You live under the surface because you're not subject to weather, asteroid impacts, attacks, solar conditions, things like that. Let me give you an example of how simple that is that people miss all the time. Let's say you go out and build a house. Do you live on the roof or do you live inside of it after you build it?
You live inside. We basically build our own underground. So it's kind of like an oxymoron. And
the planet was formed to do so, just like the mitochondria is formed to do so. A planet is a sentient being. It's very slow. Like, for example, if I told you a rock is a sentient being, and you don't recognize it as such because it only has one thought every 1,000 years, which actually is more often than most people that I've met. But anyway, do you negate it because it has one thought every 1,000 years? It's easy to dismiss it, right?
Oh, well, to answer that question, I think I read this in a book, but I agree that the way to look at stones and rocks having their own souls is they're part of a hive soul. And if you look at them together, like at a mountain, you can say that it has its own imprint there. And I also just want to add that the thing about dimension and density that this book had to say is that something like you said, that densities are nested inside the dimensions. And for example, rock and mineral and planets are one-dimensional, and then we have animals and the plant order that are second, and then we are third, and then the more advanced aliens. And there has to be something to that
yes.
Draco and stuff and Anunnaki are 4 and 5D, right? So and that heaven is 7D.
Density. When you say D, okay. For example, let's look at The ether is an expression, in other words, everything physical and non-physical is an expression of a more subtle energy called the ether. When I write ether, I like to spell it the old way with an A, so A-E-T-H-E-R versus just E-T-H-E-R, because that was when it was really studied. Ether just means sky. It's a Greek word, etheros, right? This is a very subtle energy. It acts as a fluid. Generally, just like high voltage acts as a fluid, if you have a spark plug wire or a very high tension wire, if you break the insulation, the way the high voltage leaks out is no different than if you had a garden hose. So it almost acts like a fluid in some cases. But let me just mention the life forms. So you have the stones and the rocks, which are very subtle. And we can define, I'd like to also define what a soul and a spirit is in the body. It's very easy and everyone is misusing that. But let's just go back to the rock collective. One thing about stones is they can't move, just like plants. Plants can't move, but they are sentient beings. There's a book about that, how they hooked up devices to measure impulses in plants, and when you cut a leaf off, the impulse went up, and they were so intelligent that even if you stood away, the secret life of plants, even if the next day, if you came back just holding a scissor, it would sense that you were holding a scissor, right? Okay. So, but the plants can't move either. You know, they're subject to it. So plants and rocks are in a constant dream state. And otherwise they would be in a shock. Like, for example, if you're in a dream state and you find yourself dreaming that you're in the middle of the road and here comes this big semi-truck and it runs you over, you kind of get startled, but you're like, screw it, it's a dream, I'm okay, right? So in other words, to go into the mind of a rock, the spirit of a rock or a plant, they can't move. They're constantly in a dream state. Let's just not to close the subject, move fast forward. You've heard of ayahuasca, cannabis, marijuana, all these things. When you take these strong plant extracts, what kind of a state do you go into? Thank you. You see? Hallucinogenic dream state kind of thing. So yeah. We are, right? So, and the minerals, when you take minerals, you see? So these things are all connected.
What about cocaine though?
Cocaine is not really, it's a derivative. Like, for example, it would be like heroin to opium, right? Cocaine is highly, highly derived. It's highly refined, like white cane sugar, like not even white cane, just like white sugar is highly refined. It would be more like an artificial sweetener. For example, even today, if you go into the airports of Peru or places in Japan where they have high altitude airports, they have a street vendor that has cocoa leaves from the coca plant that they grind up in a tea, and they give you a little bit of chalk or alkaline because it's very acidic to take to help with high altitude sickness, for example, right?
But,
so anyway, let's go back to the Elohim and the Anunnaki. We branched off into the field and the densities, but go ahead, Daniel. This is a papyri discussion. Yeah.
Yeah. If you had some Anunnaki, I'm all ears if you want to finish with that.
No, well, the gods is very is complex because, for example, you have the beings that tell humans, simple-minded humans, that they're gods, and the Bible says if someone does, you have to test them, right? Or other ancient texts, right? Like the jinn and other places. Okay, so there's many levels, many hierarchies to it, and it's all based on power. When we're talking about this universe here, like for example, you also mentioned the Draco. So that is another set of beings. They also have a bad rap, which they shouldn't. Most of the beings out there are reptilian, by the way, not human. Even if you read in the Bible, what they call Satan in the Garden of Eden was what's called a Nakash, a shining one. We're looking at Nakash. It wasn't a snake at all. But anyway, that's another discussion. If you have comprehension, one day we can discuss the book of Genesis and I'll show you what's in there and you'll freak out and you'll see that modern science, what they tell you about cosmology, what happened 13,000 years ago and before, it's all right there. You don't need some mysticism, right? If you're one of these people that knows septem means 7, octo means 8, novum means 9, and decim means 10, and you're surrounded by morons, then you'll be able to see what I'm talking about, right? So, or get to that point very quickly. But the beings that are known as the Elohim are different than the Anunnaki, but similar. They're not from planets as such. Just like, for example, there are certain species, anthropomorphic-looking species, if you run into them and you ask them what planet you're from, they kind of like shake their head and don't really, you have to rephrase it because for 1,000 generations, they live on a spaceship that's 1,000 miles long, and 500 miles wide. Why do we need a planet, right? You see?
Which their motherships sometimes are actually, from what I heard, hollowed out comets and such. But
They can be. That's just like you have different types of architecture. You have people living in tents all the way to people living in castles, people living on the side of a cliff, and right, different. The Japanese architecture is very different than the European architecture.
Yes, but
So you have mud brick homes, right?
yeah, also, we have a close example like that, the moon. Am I correct? I mean, yes, there's some.
The moon, yeah, the moon is a something that's been kicked around literally like a cheap whore for a very long time. But the moon is very important to acknowledge the moon in time referencing because it affects the ether flow, meaning gravity, which we will do. I can maybe define how simple gravity is. Actually, there's no such thing, just like time. But the moon is something that has a very strong stimulus on hormones, growth of beings on the planet, the tides, as it's known, geology. So it cannot be ignored, right? But it's not indigenous, and I can explain. The moon is another thing that's easy. It's simple to explain, but it's still cloaked in tremendous mystery until we know more about it.
Well, that guy Virgil Norman from NASA who wrote that book Ringmakers of Saturn, I don't know if that's disinformation, but it does, I think, at some point show how or talk about how the moon was towed into orbit. And no planet is just like in tidal lock like that. It's an observation station, and the joke's on us.
Yeah, it is. The joke is that, and also the other thing, even NASA's recently admitted that, and I've been saying this for 30 years, the moon is in Earth's orbit and it's in high atmosphere. And recently, I think a month ago, NASA admitted that the moon is in Earth's high atmosphere. In other words, our atmosphere goes out to the moon, right? It's very thin, obviously, but it changes. It's logarithmic and fractal. In other words, as you go away from the Earth, the gravity decreases, but then you go another few hundred miles, it increases. Then you go further away, it decreases, then it increases again. Just like the ripples in the pond, you have one ripple that goes below the surface and a ripple that comes above the surface.
It's offset. Yeah, it's centered.
It's offset, right.
Yeah.
And also here's there are also migrations because there are currents that attach the moon to the Earth. Like you want to talk about that silver tube you started off with. There are currents between the Earth and the moon that make travel much easier. Just like the silver tube had a map, for example, that was 500 years old, that if you had this information on what day you leave to go from Europe to America, you'll have a 50 to 70 mile per hour, if you translate, wind on your back, so you'll make the trip in 3 days. And what day to leave America to come back to Europe, and what path to take so you can make it back in 3 days. If you didn't have this information, you're out on the ocean for 1 to 3 months, right? Big difference, right?
Oh,
yes.
So, and this is still, all these things are still being, I've seen things that I'm like, shouldn't that be in a museum? Is it legal for, I was young. Is it legal for you to have that? You know, I've seen stuff from the ancient Egyptian dynasties that look brand new and many things, but that's another discussion. So anyway, we're talking about the gods. Let me just drop this on people. You know how we take a hint? You know when you're talking, some people could take a hint better than others, and some people are just really thick. They cannot take a hint. And even when you tell them clearly, they still don't get it. That's the other extreme. But if you look at ancient texts, for example, before we go to, let's say, the biblical text, and I'm not a Bible thumper at all. The only reason I refer to the biblical text because it has more information and history and detail that we can relate to than anything else that I've seen out there, other than some of the Rig Vedas and the Mahabharata when it comes to the alien wars that happened. But that's another thing. You know, the 10,000 suns that lit up the sky. Okay, so when you go into the biblical text, for example, before I do that, there's a movie called Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, okay? A lot of these science fiction things, for example, like George Orwell, 1984, or Aldous Huxley, Brave New World.
Oh, yeah.
If you read the unabridged introduction, those were commissions that the elite, those were not books that these authors did on their own cognizance.
No,
they were told to write that.
Yeah,
and they say it
to us before they wipe us out.
I think the term is soft disclosure, right?
Yes, soft and hard disclosure, because if you read Brave New World, that's pretty rough. So is 1984. That's not soft at all.
Now, and these people didn't have. I mean, I'm not saying Aldous Huxley or George Orwell are dumbasses at all. I'm simply saying they couldn't have had that clear of foresight.
Exactly.
I mean, like, and you know, yes, of course, this is all relayed to them, and they put it out there because I don't know what your views are on Alex Jones, which I'd like to know, but
he's a publicist. first, right? He's a publicist. So that's my view on him. So what is this? He's a publicist. What is he publishing?
Well, he's trying
That's
to
all.
break things down for us.
As a publicist can.
Okay, yeah, but yeah, outside of you and
It's almost like saying he's an attorney or he's a politician. How much are you going to get out of a politician or attorney or a publicist? He's beholden to other forces that he can't, you see? It's kind of like when you watch stuff on TV, they can't tell you something that's against the commercial they're going to play in 5 minutes.
if they're sponsored, yeah.
Just
They're
being
sponsored.
of certain fame level kind of precludes you from being able to tell much truth.
Well, there's one thing, and there's another thing that's being responsible to the audience. In other words, you put the appropriate object in the appropriate vessel. The reason why things are, in air quotes, I'm putting so bad is because they're simply accommodating the people. The people don't want the truth. If you don't believe that, go out. Let's stop this call right now and go outside your door and stand there for 5 minutes and start talking to whoever walks by. They don't want the truth. I'm not being sarcastic.
No,
So they're accommodating them. But what happens is if you accommodate them too much on junk food and whatever, they get sick, and then it gets a vicious cycle until they become destroyed. For example, if you go out, we have big highways here in America, like I-10, it goes through the desert. Hey, I got a business proposition. We're going to spend a few $1 million to open a big gas station convenience store in the middle of the desert. You're crazy. That's terrible for business. Who's going to come and buy anything? The coyotes and the rattlesnakes and the birds? No, no, no. It's on I-10. There's 200,000 cars that drive by every day. Oh, great. We're going to do really good business, right? What happens if that highway closes?
Oh.
The business is done. So this is what's going on. The highway is the people, and the Illuminati, the TV, the media, all the stuff that you see, the religions, is accommodating them. Right? Do you see a hot dog vendor, in the middle of on the street selling street food because there's nobody there? No, he's there because there are people there that are going to buy it. And basically, so what happens is it's a catch-22. So you have to break the cycle. One is eliminate the provider, and then the people ask what happened, or eliminate the people, and then people's mindset to want that stuff. And it's not going to happen because they're locked in a catch-22 resonant phase right now. You see.
At the same time, this closure seems kind of at the boiling point where they can't hide it for much longer.
Well, there's nothing to hide. It's already been disclosed. That's why I want to get into what I mentioned earlier, the Aldous Huxley, but went on a tangent to go back. There's a movie and a book, I forgot who wrote it. It's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So they could find this supercomputer on a planet, and they ask the supercomputer, what is the answer to everything? So they come back 1 million years
42.
later. Yes. And they said, it can't be. Well, no, it is. I thought about it for a very long time. If you go back to the biblical text, there were 42 stations that the Israelites moved through in the desert. In the first book of what they call the New Testament, the book of Matthew, there are 42 generations that lead to the Christ. That number 42 keeps showing up, which is 6 times 7. This is the 42nd time on the earth that the humans have been basically created and destroyed. Well, there's no created. There's one type that's been created, and there's one type that's been formed. In other words, there's a created human, and then there's another one that's genetically modified, which is a reformation. And that's in the Bible in the first bit, and I've explained that there's two. So if I ask, for example, let's say you look at the biblical text as being a history of humanity, which one are you, Daniel or Zan? Are you one of the ones, that were made on the 6th day, or the one that was made on the 8th day? Which one? And you don't know, and I don't know, right? Well, actually, that's another story. I like to not talk about sometimes those personal things. But if you look at the creation in Genesis, there's 7 days, right? And man was made on the 6th day. We know that each day is 1,000 years. It's mentioned 3 times in the Bible. In the Psalms, one of the prophets, and in the New Testament twice, that when the gods or the Elohim talk about a day, it's 1,000 years for us, which gives us a 360,000 to 1 ratio. 360 days in a year times 1,000, right? You see? So 360,000 to 1 ratio, because 1,000 days is 1,000 years is 1 day. Anyway.
Does that have to do with, you mentioned in one of your interviews that our atmosphere is pumped with a certain gas?
Yes, they pump.
And is that
that's
nitrogen?
one being. Well, we're not oxygen breathers, we're nitrogen breathers. We convert the nitrogen into oxygen We can talk about Louis Kervran and how chickens produce calcium from magnesium in their bodies. We produce oxygen in our bodies by breathing nitrogen. There's a little bit of oxygen that's required with the nitrogen as a catalyst to get the reaction going. And if you look at the periodic table of elements, when you see nitrogen, in order for nitrogen to become oxygen, to transmute, it has to pass through carbon. So a little bit of carbon is also created in the lungs. That's why they mistakenly say that you intake the oxygen and you exhale carbon dioxide. No, you don't exhale anything ever. The exhaling is the byproduct of the nitrogen turning into oxygen, passing through carbon, and that carbon bond is formed. And I could prove that many times. I could show you how that works. Everything works through transmutation. But
can I just interject one thing here, because I was going to ask you, and this is the most organic, I guess, that all these people talk, and rightfully so, that food is the principal thing that gives you health, and certainly not medicine or anything. But something that's overlooked is that food, you can go without for something like, I don't know, 40 days, and water for like 7 days, but no one puts much emphasis on the quality of the air. And I would think that, from my personal experience, that's actually the most life-giving and the most overlooked thing that you should commit to, and the most insidious one, in that the one that makes you the sickest without you noticing ever. And if you were to commit more attention to the quality of your air around you, you would see benefits much more than from food and the like.
Oh, of course. Okay, the human body, let's jump into it real quick. Now, the thing is, you know what the concept of mixing is when you have various things and you throw them together. The knowledge that about biology and medicine and all that that's put out in university and from common to university, and doctors don't know much, by the way. They're a religion. If you ask a doctor about or a dentist about fluoride, he cannot give you any information. He just says, I believe in it. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you know? So anyway, you cannot mix what is being put out to the public and what the people know with what I'm about to say. They do not mix. So give you an example. When I drive around in the car, I have a map on the Garmin locating all the doctors' offices, clinics, and hospitals in my area. And I also recently invested in some really good earplugs, the ones you crush and put inside your ear. There's some other ones. And the reason why I have those earplugs and the map of the doctors' offices, the medical clinics, and the hospitals is when I know I'm approaching one, I have to slow down and put the earplugs in, because if I don't, when I pass the doctor's office, the quacking is so loud and deafening that my ears ring for 2 or 3 days. So I have to be very careful driving around town. Anyway, give me an example. Let's start off very simply, how asinine and how ridiculous humans are. I hear this all the time, not just the people that order the triple cheese pepperoni pizza with a Diet Coke, but they tell you calories, caloric intake, right? Caloric intake. Oh my goodness. This is another prank, worse than the timekeeping, worse. Okay, a calorie is defined, it's a thermal unit basically, it's a type of thermal unit, that the amount of energy that's required to raise 1 gram or 1 cubic centimeter of water 1 degree Celsius. So if you've ever been around a calorimeter, it's basically a vessel that has a viewing glass, and you put whatever in there that you want to find out how many calories it has. It's put into water. It's pumped up with pure oxygen inside the container, and they put a spark in there, and everything inside the container goes poof and turns into ash, carbon, even beyond that, and they measure how much heat it gives off, and that's the caloric value of that object. You with me? Yeah. So let's say you look at a banana, you take the calories of a banana, let's say it's 60 calories. So you eat that banana and you pass it through your body, and you take your stool after you pass it through your body. Is that burnable? Yes, I can take the stool and put it in the calorimeter, and poof, it'll burn and give off more heat. So how many calories did you get out of the banana? Oh, unless you pooping carbon, right? Every time you go to the bathroom, pure carbon comes out that cannot be burned. Yeah. Calories have nothing to do with nutrition. A cubic centimeter of chlorinated plastic, let's just say if you've been around young children and you give them a chessboard or a checkers board, you'll hear some crying and screaming because one of the young guys picked up the piece and swallowed it, right? What do we do? Are you okay? Can you breathe? Yeah, he swallowed the chess piece, the 4-year-old. Okay, so then what happens is he passes it and you clean it up really well. You got your chess piece back. That little 20 grams of plastic has about 3,000 calories in a calorimeter. How many calories did you get out of that piece of plastic when you swallowed it? Calories are a prank and a joke. It has not, so, okay, Are you
Just
with
like
me on this?
virology.
Yeah. Okay, so we go on and on and on. Like another thing, the body is completely sealed. Nothing ever goes in, nothing ever comes out. For example, actually, before I get to that, I want to get to another thing. They have these grocery stores, these big supermarkets here. And inside they have pharmacies. And in the pharmacy, I don't know if you've seen them, they when people are waiting in line to get their, by the way, the word pharma means poison in Greek. You could look it up. It doesn't mean medicine, it means poison. And they're telling you, there's your soft disclosure. I think it's a hard on, not a soft one, right? In your face. And because they used to put big penises in ancient cultures as arrows. By the way, the siege, when they would tear down a wall, a battering ram, it had the shape of a penis in ancient times, right? Let's go on with the thing. They have a blood pressure machine at the pharmacy. You put $1, some coins, it tells you your blood pressure. So whenever I see the pharmacist is not too busy, because I don't like disturbing people and creating disturbances, I'll catch his eye and I'll say, hey, excuse me, where can I get one of these? And I'm pointing at the blood pressure machine. And he says, I don't know, we rent them, but why do you want one? Because I'm opening a museum of medical fakery and quackery, and I want this to be one of my exhibits. And he scratches his head. He never says, get out of here, whatever. Sometimes they see me and they take a break and say, why do you say it's medical fakery and quackery? I said, wow, you're a pharmacist and you don't know. It's just like, for example, if you run into a priest and ask him about the JESUS, he's going to give you the party line. He doesn't know anything that I just said earlier about the biblical Christ, right? These doctors are exactly the same. These doctors don't know any more than the common people, by the way. And I'll get into why and how the only thing that they're worth is emergency medicine. If you're leaking, all your guts are spilling out, they have battlefield medicine knowledge that's been accumulated for 3,000 years that they're applying to you. They don't know anything beyond that. So here we go. They put a strap on your arm and they inflate it to block the blood flow, which is moving under a vacuum condition, negative pressure. And they measure the pulses, the interval between the blood pulse, and they tell you that's your blood pressure. How ridiculous is that? Anyone who's worked around pressurized vessels with fluid knows that if you cut yourself, there's no pressure there at all. If there was any pressure in the body, positive pressure, you would attach an IV bag to someone and come back 10 minutes later, it would be full of bodily fluids and blood. But I've seen in hospitals when they attach an IV bag to someone, it drains out and gets sucked into the body, right? It's obvious. This is in your face, okay? So what they're doing with blood pressure is a prank and a hoax, just like, for example, you go to one of these quote-unquote doctors for a diagnosis. By the way, when people say I came to the doctor, Greek, and I want you to tell me if what he told me is possible. I said, did he take your blood pressure and all that? And as part of the diagnosis, yeah, I don't want to hear it. The guy is incompetent, right? For example, if you look at animals, when do they take a blood pressure of a horse or a dog or a cat? That's a hoax that's designed to hoax the people. So this is the same thing. You go to the doctor and he says, I have to diagnose you. So he ties a string around your finger and he makes it really tight. And it can't be a regular string. It has to be a medically approved FDA string. And he can't use a regular clock. It has to be a medically approved FDA or whatever authority. And then after a certain time, he has a chart on the wall that goes from flesh tone to purple. And he holds your finger up to see what color your finger turned. And he says, you've got stupiditis A or stupiditis B, right? And the people believe it. So now he writes a prescription for that. See, what people don't understand is this, that I give an analogy. When I say Microsoft, you think of Bill Gates, right? When I say Apple Computer, you think of Steve Jobs. If I say Ford Motor Company, you think of Henry Ford, the early plane, the Wright brothers. If I say the medical system, you need to think of people like Rockefeller.
Yeah, 1911, the
Flexner.
Right? The Flexner report.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what do you know about these people? They're fake philanthropy and they're whatever. They're vicious. Okay. So I want you to, both of you, if you can, put in cross-section of a car tire, go to images.
Okay.
And pull that up. This is like, let's say someone's driving and listening to this sonic event. At least three of us looking at the picture, it tends to telecommunicate better. Okay, now I want you to do another image. Put in the intestines, right? Cross-section of intestines and pull up a close-up. Okay. What's the difference? Structurally.
You made this point. Nothing can get through. You were saying.
Yeah, look at it. Nothing can get. You could, if you have a close up. I'm not sure how to do this image that I have.
Let me tell you this too, Greek, sir. Is here in Louisiana, us very sophisticated people, we make something called boudin, which is you literally take the intestines of an animal and you put liquids and solids and
it holds it. Yeah.
And it hold, yeah. So
Yeah, the soccer ball, the original bladders are still being used by people, indigenous tribes all over the world to hold water. Nothing passes through. If anything is absorbed or passes through any physical tissue in the body, you will die of sepsis within 3 days. So let me, okay, do you know what controlled opposition is, right?
huh.
Yeah.
Okay, the holistic medicines, not some of them, all of them are controlled opposition. Just like, for example, I like to use 9/11 as a thing. Well, they have the other people, oh, it was space weapons, or it was, oh, they had explosives on each floor. That's all controlled. They love that. They laugh at that. So the holistic doctors are being laughed at. They're not a threat at all because the holistic doctors talk about, I have a really good supplement. It's natural and the body absorbs it really well. Oh my gosh, and when I challenge them on it or do the images, they say, well, I've been practicing for 30 years. You didn't answer the question. It's like you're catching a rat in a corner. So why I'm saying this, I'm being kind of embittered about it, is because people, you're on your own. You're not going to go find a holistic doctor, because if you had a holistic doctor, alternative doctor, that was saying half of what I'm saying, they're not going to be around very long because they're operating under the Rockefeller privilege. Anyway, this is not conspiracy theory. This is constructive reality. There's a difference. So you're being surrounded with choices, and it's the same groups that are controlling it. Okay. So the next one, let's go to another one. Do a cross section that I have here on image, cross section of the skin. Very close. You're going to see it's very much like the intestine. The follicles and the dermis are slightly arranged differently, but like the car tire in the intestine. Cross section of skin. There's no water. The water is, I'll explain how the sweat forms and all that. Very simple. Right? Do you see it? You guys see the cross section of the human skin? It's like the car tire or the intestine. Now let's do the lung, cross section of lung tissue. That's actually extremely robust. It has some hollow sections because, of course, we're dealing with gases.
A peripheral note, if the Rockefellers are the ones extinguishing all this good information, how are they storing theirs and preserving it for future generations? Do they have their own libraries?
Yeah, they do and they don't. At this point, let me just, they worship death. So for them to bring death upon the living is worshiping their God, even if you see, this is kind of macabre, but for example, the skull and bones, look up, do a quick search on 322 skull and bones.
Yale University,
Yeah, but if you look at even Wikipedia, they're actually known as what? The Brotherhood of what? Look it up. Somebody say it. Yes, that's right. The Brotherhood of Death. Yes.
Why do they worship death, though? That's the thing. Like it's
well, because everyone dies. And so you can have, when you're alive, you could practice whatever religion you want, but you're all going to die. So death is the superior. I could get into what the Freemasons say about that, which is another thing. One day the highest secrets of Freemasons will do, you know, yeah, you'll see how ridiculous it is. Okay, so do you see that nothing passes through? So what's going on is the body is sealed up in a vacuum, and what's happening is transmutation. As these products pass through, you have an opening that pass through from the mouth through the anus, okay? So you have an opening, just like, let's say you dig a tunnel through a mountain, the mouth on one end and the anus on the other. And that's the only thing. You have some ducts and some organs, but that's not relevant at this point. They have different purposes. As the matter passes through, whether it's the cul-de-sac of the lungs where it goes in and then it has to turn around and come back out like a cul-de-sac, or the intestines, you have a process called induction. Induction is very similar to, you ever see these glass top stoves where you have a pot of boiling water and you move the pot put your hand right on the glass top, it's room temperature. You put the pot right on the glass again and it starts boiling immediately, okay? That's the process of induction, okay? There's a fellow named Louis Kervran, Kervran, that was wondering how chicken eggs are so robust with calcium. So where does the calcium come from? And he eliminated, did a regen diet where they made sure they got all the food for the subject chickens from a laboratory to make sure there was no traces of calcium in their food. And after 3 months, they were still producing robust calcium eggs with no bone loss. So where's the calcium coming from? Yeah, he's another person that they hounded to death and made sure that he spent his last days living on a park bench, just like they did for Tesla and all these other people.
Is it this whole thing about being in a vacuum comparable to hollow earth? Is like a microcosm of that, meaning
Yes.
that You said also that you can heal a broken bone inside 3 to 6 days if you know how, and meaning that it's stuff that is happening non-physically, I guess.
Yeah, it's by, well, then we would ask, is induction a physical or non? It's both. It's a ethereal, non-phys. In other words, electricity running through your wires is not a physical thing, right? I always cut wires. I have rubber gloves. I cut the wire, and I have a dustpan to collect all the electrons that come out of the wire. Never found them, by the way. Or I never found the photons out of a light bulb. You know, I don't know how the photons in a vacuum filament of a light bulb go through the glass without making a hole in the glass, the photons, and go into the room. Ridiculous. Most of the world is non-material. The first thing you have to do is accommodate the body's vacuum, and you trick it depending on what you want to do. We can get into that. But here, real quick, the other thing is seasonality. Very, 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 very important. This is not a diversion. This is parallel. When you're living in, let's say, a cold climate, it's generally cold, like 9 or 10 months of winter, and you order food from the tropics, like some bananas, papayas, and mangoes that are grown in a warm climate. When you eat those products, your body is going to say, oh, these are products from a warm climate, and the chemistry here is going to induce a thinner blood and a chemistry as if I'm living in the tropics, and you're going to get sick. The opposite is true. If you're living in the tropics and you say, I want to eat some Arctic fish like salmon from Alaska or the Arctic Ocean, or whale blubber or something, when you eat that living in the hot temperatures, it's going to make your blood thick like you're living in the Arctic, and you will get sick again. So the way you get sick, for example, is the first thing is your body starts to lose this vacuum condition. Just like, for example, if you look at a high-performance sports car on the dashboard, you have all these gauges. It tells you oil pressure, fuel, electricity, all these things, right? Gauges on sophisticated equipment. Imagine a vacuum gauge, and this is how it works. For example, let's start off with this. When a woman is pregnant, what holds the baby in? Do you guys know, in the cervix and the uterus? What keeps the baby from falling out? What is that mechanical, physical thing called? Because if a woman stands up, well, why doesn't the baby fall out with everything, right? It's called the mucus plug. Look it up if you want. What holds the baby from falling out of the uterus when a woman is pregnant? You'll see a diagram, and there's a long arrow, and it says mucus plug.
All right.
I see it.
Yeah.
You see it? Okay. When you start developing a sinus, like, oh, my nose is runny or my nose is clogged up. You notice a little child gets sick, I'm getting a cold, you can't breathe, my mucus, right? When you are losing vacuum, the body lets you know that by starting to plug up certain areas, because obviously the lungs are the biggest, most obvious one. And then there's swelling and edemas and things like that. So your first sign that you're losing vacuum is mucus development in the throat, in the mouth, in the nose, especially the sinuses that, by the way, reach out to the ears. Okay, anyone who does swimming knows that your air comes in the vent holes in the ears as well. Very common ear infections with children, mucus in the ears, liquid in the ears, all these things. So the body's telling you, hey, dummy, I'm losing vacuum. That's why when you live in a cold climate, they tell you in New York or places in Europe, the doctor says, oh, take vitamin, you need vitamin C. So you get fruit from the tropics, it's snowy outside. The children, they give them orange juice and tropical fruits, and they get worse and worse and worse, right? Because no one knows what's inside of an orange. They say oranges have vitamin C. Bullshit. If you find out how they determine that, is they take the orange and they do an assay. They take it, they crush it, they powderize it, and they burn it.
It's never the same as a live
it's no longer an orange. Each process of determining what's in it changes it completely. No one knows what's in an orange. Don't tell me it has vitamin C in all this.
It's the same with everything in the human body, actually, right?
Yes. Now, the other thing, let's go back to the rock. Are you guys familiar? Do a quick search. Victorian corpse medicine. Go to images. And the doctors were telling the people there are health benefits to eating dead corpses, so that when people died, they would cut them into little cube-sized pieces, sugar cube size, and distribute them as medicine. And the children found it to be very bitter, so they would dip it in chocolate. These are the same people, when they were doing this, chopping up corpses, they would go and deliver a baby, and the infant mortality rate was so high, they were almost going into genociding themselves. And a couple of people that suggested there was a hygiene problem, they should wash their hands when they're dissecting cadavers before they deliver a baby. The people that suggested they should wash their hands and observe better sanitary conditions were driven to suicide. There are things that I found on an old computer that I booked that no longer exist online. This is the group that is the backbone of your medicine.
By eating corpses, rich Europeans once think they could heal. And then it has, I mean, you can't read it, but you can see someone writing in a journal. And
yeah, no, there's actually articles about it, and it's like a humorous criticism, right? Because of course you don't want to talk about
long before Advil, people would willingly consume human blood and bone powder to cure ailments.
Right. How bizarre is that? Okay, so the seasonality, let's go back to this. The seasonality is very, very important. For example, I met someone, and it was early winter here in Tucson, which is mild, and they were wearing, I'm out in a short sleeve shirt, you know, whatever, because it's 60 degrees, 65, I'm very well acclimated, you know, Fahrenheit, in the high 20s, I guess, Celsius, or mid 20s Celsius. And this person was wearing a sweater and they were cold. I go over to their house and they have bananas on their counter and oranges. I take the bananas and oranges and said, you can't eat this now if you're complaining about being cold. I went and bought a piece of salmon and I poached it, and it was about a half a kilo. I said, eat this for the next 2 days. And then 3 days later, that person was out in a short sleeve shirt like me, just fine. For example, here in the US, if you're going to go up to the northern state of Alaska and work on the oil fields there, they give you a cut sheet, a piece of paper a few weeks before. And they said, before you come up here, you should get a tub of Cool Whip and corn oil and mix it together, whipped cream and corn oil, and take a few tablespoons every day before you come up here, right? This is common for people that work up in the colder areas. You see, so seasonality, the blood chemistry, not the chemicals in the food of being absorbed, but the chemistry next to each other, just like induction, right? Now, induction, you could look up what that means. It's a non-physical transference. So literally what's happening, literally, let's jump to a crux here, crossing the road. Let's just do a hyper jump. Let's skip a bunch of stuff and go up. You just eat typical American food, a bologna and margarine sandwich on white bread, okay? You eat that and you think you eat that and that's going to give you power for the next day because of you absorbed something ridiculous. You eat your bologna and margarine sandwich, but by the way, don't take it as a put down. I'm just saying what I see. You eat that, and as the digestion starts at the taste, at the mouth, the saliva, you swallow it. It goes from the stomach to duodenum, small intestine, large intestine, colon, out. Through that entire process, that food is being changed and prepared to run parallel against these membranes in all those areas that I just mentioned. And an induction process happens where the food is being broken down by enzymes and electrical processes. And when I say electrical processes, you ask any doctor that's an gastrointestinologist, and I say in 30 seconds or less, explain to me how the human digestive system works. He says it's a series of electrical impulses and electrical movements. Where's your electrical medicine then? The hypocrisy is incredible. So anyway, as this material, the food, the bologna and margarine sandwich, passes through all these membranes that I mentioned, those organs, in the tissue that you saw that looked like the car tire, there are a series of processes that break it down into energy, pure energy, non-material, and then on the inside of the body, on those vessels, blood vessels surrounding the organs that you see, it starts to manifest first as an energy, then as a gas, then as a liquid, and then as a solid to repair the cells. That's why, for example, if you eat a food that does not quote unquote agree with you, you get flatulence or gassy, because some of that energy was formed on the wrong side. And that's like your body telling you, hey, you're gassy, don't eat that again, because it reverses the process. So now I just explained how flatulence and gas develops. Very simple. For example, if you're ever, let's just bounce around a little. If you ever ride a bike or a motorcycle and you fall, you get what's called road rash. A large area of skin comes off, or even a scab if you fall. Let's say something a few centimeters in diameter. If you peel that scab, you know, the hard skin and blood that's dried up after a few days, you see a clear liquid, and in that clear liquid, you see small gas bubbles, if you look very closely. Because the way the skin repairs itself, first, you create swelling to stop the leaking from the vacuum. Secondly, the gases, the energy that stopped the leaking by this, creating this swelling, gases develop. The gases then drop down to a liquid, a gel liquid, and then become the skin tissue. I know it sounds pretty remarkable, right?
Right.
We
So,
were engineered to do that, huh? By what, a higher race?
no, this is actually, this is just as simple as saying, if you want to take this basis, like for example, to develop an airplane, you have to understand what an airfoil is. You have a flat surface, the bottom of the surface is completely flat, but the top is slightly curved. So when the air passes over both sides, it does so at different speeds and actually creates a lower pressure on the top, which creates lift. So once you understand the process of induction, which is non-material, the initial material to form is an imponderable gas, then a ponderable gas, then a ponderable liquid. When I say imponderable, there are things called imponderable gases and liquids, meaning they don't follow the rules of liquids and gases. If you put, for example, an imponderable liquid in a sealed container, a very good sealed container, you come back the next day and it's on the table and the container's totally, there's no hole in the container and it's completely sealed. How did it get out? The physicists show you liquid helium is an imponderable gas liquid, because when they pour the liquid helium in the glass, it rises up on the glass and it flows out all on its own. That's not
fluid. Yeah, that's the term they use.
What's that? Superfluid. Right. So for example, if you go out into outer space and you capture the gases there, you're not going to bring them back to Earth because they go right through the container, even if it's 3 inches thick steel or aluminum. They can't bring it back. By the way, it smells like burning flesh out there. The way you bring gases from space back is you use a honeycomb and it's open on the top. I'm not going to, how do I know this? But anyway, let's go to continue with the human body. So this is how it all works. Now, there's a lot of, the reason Daniel said I left a comment, because I sometimes look around SSPOs, so they talk about something, I don't want to say it, but I'll say it, med beds and all that.
Yes.
And once you understand the process of induction, this is basically how you build a med bed. You understand the human induction. Everyone is slightly different. You have to get that slight difference. It's based on their race, when they were born, their cosmology, basically, you know, not their horoscope, but when they were born, all this stuff, the stuff that's in the mitochondria. The induction process begins, the super gases, the superfluid gases, or the imponderable gases must be produced that become the gel fluids, then become the tissue based on the reference material. Let me give you an example. We're bouncing around here, but we're hoping that whoever's listening is reasonably intelligent and they can take this parallel thinking, because that's how life is. It's like driving down the road. Here's a red car, here's a green car, here's a old lady crossing the street, here's a baby, there's life. You see, that's how life is. But anyway, so when you're going down this road on how the body works and the healing, and I brought up the stupid notion of a med bed. I'll tell you why it's stupid in maybe later, or I can. Is because the principle must be understood. Let's say you have a med bed and it breaks down or you lose it. Now what? You don't know how it works. It becomes a ritual. What you see with the SSP is all these rituals. What they're talking about, when I listen to these people about the SSP, to me it's like the ritual that I see a very wealthy woman with a fur coat, and she walks up to her $300,000 Rolls Royce. And she gets into it and she drives around all day and comes back with her shopping. And I ask her anything about that car. She knows absolutely nothing. To her, that car is a ritual. The ritual is thus. She knows that if she gets into the car, this pedal on the right, if she performs this ritual, the car goes. This other pedal, if she performs this ritual, the car stops. If she turns this wheel to the left, the car goes to the left. Turns this wheel to the right, it goes to the right. She cannot explain anything. She doesn't know anything that's going on. She doesn't, you see? Let's go back to the healing process. Now, you must understand the process. Like, for example, if you're on a deserted island that was very high altitude and you wanted to build a glider to get off because it was more efficient than building a raft, can you do it? Yeah, if you understand the principle of an airfoil, of course, right? So the principle here is the induction. Let's just bounce around a little bit. Let's go back to someone, for example, who is not feeling well, and you notice they have mucus and swelling. The body is struggling to increase the negative pressure, right, by clogging things up and decreasing the volume. So what you do to help that person is you wrap their body tight or put weights on them. I tell people, take a blanket and put sandbags, or if you do several blankets, and if you have books or anything heavy, put it on their limbs, not their central core like the stomach or lungs where it has to move, but their arms and legs. Cover it with weights for 20 minutes. So what you're doing, that weight is going to decrease the volume, and the body's going to say, oh, I don't have to struggle to create so much vacuum because the volume just decreased. I'm at equilibrium. Actually, there's compression wear for athletes. There's some like tight, you know how the athletic wear is tight?
Yeah.
Certain panels on the tops or the bottoms are extra tight to create compression on certain areas. Here's another notion. When you bang your elbow on your nose or your head, your first instinct is to what? Put your hand on it and squeeze it. That's your instinct without even a child does that, right? Because if you don't do that, you're going to get swelling, and the swelling is what happened. The cells are packed so tight that that bumping movement moves them momentarily enough to lose vacuum, and the lymphatic fluid flows in there to make a plug, a natural plug, right? That's why when you get a cut, first thing is wrap it very tight, so tight that it doesn't matter if you cut off circulation just for a few minutes. So the brain does, see, 5 times a second, the brain sends a message to the body saying, are you okay? And 5 times a second, the body, it's just below the Schumann resonance. 5 times a second, the body sends a message back to the brain saying, we're okay. Back and forth constantly, right? That's, okay. What I wanted to say earlier before I got into this is, you know, like the doctor, when they take a blood test, they look at the blood cells, right?
Right.
You know what they don't know when they, let's say, take red blood cells. Okay, let's just take one group of cells. When they have a sample and they're looking at a slide and they see, let's say, a few hundred cells, and you ask them, what is that? And they'll say, those are red blood cells. Okay, and that's it. They'll tell you the certain shape because there's certain like anemias, sickle cell, Cooley's anemia, right? That the cell becomes twisted, right? Let's say they're healthy cells. That's all they can say. Okay, dummy. You can't see that these cells over here are for the big toe based on their serial number, and these cells over here are for the eye, and this one's for the earlobe, and this one's for the rectum. You don't see that? No, we don't see that. They see just random red blood cells. Is this the first time you guys are hearing this, by the way?
Sure.
Okay, so now once you develop a system, which is not difficult, and I'm not going to go public with it right now, on how to determine which red blood cell, what part of the body it goes, you have a system of what's called coding and very specific attachment. Now, when you understand this, this is part of the information package in the code that has to go into what's called the medbed.
So you have to have
the coding of the cells,
right.
All of them.
It's holographic.
Doesn't have to be holographic. No, it doesn't have to be. It has to be inductive. Because remember, you're going from energy to a super gas to a liquid. Okay, here's an example. Water. Water is the least understood. Water is not H2O. It's very easy to prove that. I prove it all the time. Okay. Before I get into what water is, do you ever see little children? They drink a lot of water, or maybe you've done it. You drink a quart of water and you jump up and down and you feel it slushing in your stomach. You can actually hear it, just like shaking a container of orange juice or something, right? Okay, you wait 2 minutes, jump up and down. Is there any more slushing? None, because the water became a gel state by the inductive energy in the body, turned into a gel. It's not hard to produce water as a gel. I did that, I got in big trouble. I said, if you do this again, you're in big trouble. So go ahead.
They're now finally starting to realize that there are multiple states of water. They're calling it coherent water, and
yeah.
At least these dissident doctors,
trying.
Yeah, and that what you refer to as the vacuum, otherwise what keeps healthy, they refer to as your water being coherent, which if you mess with that, that's what upsets everything else.
Well, this is what I do with people that don't, because I have a few with Uphkalu private calls and others on how to. I've worked in industry and I've made a pipe. There's a farm, for example, that has discharge of nitrates. You know, nitrates from the fertilizers, and they will not let them discharge the runoff water because it has over 180 parts per million of nitrates, right? It has to be below 40. So I built this pipe. It's about 6 feet long, and you hold it up and you look right through it. There's nothing in the guts. It's just a straight pipe right through. I said, put this pipe in your section. It's just not any pipe. It's something that took me a while to build. I put it in the section of the irrigation. The 180, actually it was 400 parts per million sometimes, usually 180 parts per million nitrates, various types of nitrates coming through the water. It runs through the pipe and it's anywhere between 15 to 20 parts per million. It has to be below 40 to be acceptable. And they took the pipe, I came back late and it was, where's the night, what was going, there's no filtering, there's nothing, it's just going through a special pipe. And it reduced it by 90%. I came back later on to check on it, and they removed the pipe and they didn't know where it was. It was another group of people running the farm. And they called the original person who I did this for, and I said, what happened to it? He says, well, the university came here and they told me it could never work, and they told me to take it out. So I bought this $250,000 chemical refining. It's called flocculation, to remove the water. It's almost as good as what you had here. I'm like, are you an idiot? So the university could not explain it, and I think they took the pipe, right? So imagine you had a free energy device in your house, and you left it there, and you came back, and your roommate said, I don't know, some people came and took it, right? Of course, some people. So anyway, okay, water is not H2O.
Level of prosperity, though, Greek. When Tesla has these breakthroughs, when any of these doctors have these breakthroughs, why can't they just prosper? Why can't?
Well, they're not. This is very simple. Okay, biggest mistake you can make. Anyone who says we have to make the world a better place is screwed. Why? Because you have evil forces on the planet, both corporeal and non-corporeal, that do not want to see the world to become a better place. Agreed?
Why do they not want to do that?
Well, because that's just their lot in life. They harvest the negative energy, for example. Okay. Then also, but you're at a point in this history right now that the good forces are ready to come and clean it up and mop it up. It's very brutal when they do that. And you saying to make the world a better place, it's too late, and now you're part of the problem also. So when you say to make the world a better place, you're going to have the good side and the bad side against you. So the way you do that is not by saying it, but by actually doing it by example. Okay, you don't advertise and you don't wish it, because you know it's going to, the good forces are going to come, they're going to apply a very high level of brutality. But it's going to be different this time. Okay, I want to just jump back to the water. They tell you water is H2O. Go ahead.
You're glossing over something that seems like we're all about to get destroyed or something, and now.
Yeah, no, there's going to be a good representative sample left over. Usually before they destroy mostly everyone, and the ones that are worth keeping, that are good, let's say, or righteous, they keep. But this time they're going to do it differently. They're going to destroy about 95%, and there's only a few thousand people that they would consider keeping out of the billions. What's that?
Who are these people?
Well, if you know enough, you'll be able to recognize them.
Right. I think they were a group of ETs that are sometimes nicknamed the parents, and they communicate with the very elite people that you would never know the names of, am I right?
Sure. But the elites are also, okay, there's two types of elites we haven't gotten into. There's the ones that are there as the ones you know about, you hear about, and then there's the ones that are actually hybrids. Like, how everyone's talking about the Anunnaki. I'm just sick of that word.
They're just part of it.
Yeah, if you go, I'm sick of it because it's like the biblical stuff. Anybody who uses the JESUS is a code. The elites love to hear you use that word, God, you believe in God. They love to hear you say that because that means you know nothing about the subject, right? That's like, they love to hear people say, oh, that goddamn Osama bin Laden, he sent 19 Arab hijackers that vaporized the towers with box cutters. See, so it's a code. If you have any comprehension of the Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki, yes, are there, but they're sidebar. The main feature in the Sumerian texts are the Uphkalu, and no one's talking about the Uphkalu because everyone's brainwashed.
Are these the guys that have it within them to reset the civilization?
Yes, no, they're hybrids. They are the hybrids. In other words, the Anunnaki don't come here to, they couldn't care less. We're like on a long laundry list of things they have to do today, right? What they do is they come here and they form the Uphkalu. The Uphkalu are hybrids. In the Bible, they're referred to as the Nephilim. You'll see, when you look at Sumerian artwork, Assyrian artwork, and they show an 18-foot tall guy that has a lion under his arm. It's a 400-pound lion. He holds it like a house cat. they're not making, and they have winged creatures and chimera and hybrids. They're not making those things up. They carved in stone what they saw and what was there, you see. And they're also a little more intelligent than humans. They don't muck about on the surface. Because they're intelligent, they don't walk around the surface. Why? If you ask them why you're not on the surface, well, because we could get hit by an asteroid. Because I don't like the weather today. The sun burns my skin. You know?
Are they hybridized with something like 50-50 human?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
A special type of human. Again, you can't just grab a human. You have to breed the human to be hybridized.
The reason why I ask is because the way I understood it from, he mentioned Penny Bradley. She is, in my opinion, the best, the most credible person in this SSP. And she says that the hierarchy does not end with the hybrids. They are the highest on Earth, but it goes first to the Draco who own this planet and lease it out, and then to Galactic Authority, who are the people who truly reset every era of man, and decide whether to let it be destroyed or not. I'm just relaying.
There's some truth in that. Yeah, some truth. No, that as what I found out is different. But okay. Yes, I would keep it in a. There's no ownership. You've heard of the term first in time is first in line, or first in line is first in time. The first one to show up, sense of discovery. Okay, let me give you an analogy. What's going on? You're in a particular universe. These beings come from a different universe, which we're in one dimension. Everything is in this one dimension. Within this single dimension, you have the perceivable and the imperceivable based on, like I said earlier, the best person with the best eyesight sees less than 1% of what can be seen, right? So why aren't these things being discussed by quote unquote experiencers? Okay, let me just say this. So far, I'm not convinced. What I see is, quote unquote, I'm not knocking anyone, is that they lie and you swear to it. Somebody lies and the other person swears to it. This is what I feel about experiencers, and no. I have an auditorium with 500 people, and there's a guy on stage that cuts a woman in half and puts her back together. I'm going to go to all those 500 people and sitting in the audience, and they experience that, and they're going to swear with a legal affidavit that they saw a woman being cut in half and being put back together on stage at the show. Yes, they will swear that they saw that. Are they lying? No, they're not. They're telling their truth. Their truth.
It's just that after a certain point, it exceeds anyone's ability to make up. So the only other option is that it's some kind of simulation. But
yes,
even then,
scenario.
what would be the purpose? And they intertwine with each other all these testimonies, and they sometimes span hundreds of interviews, and they confirm so many things that are happening on Earth. And
sure, but everything they confirm has something in common that screams that it's a scenario that's being played on them, a prank. When I watch them, to me, it's like going to, if you know anyone that has young children, 6, 7-year-old, and they do the play, they get on stage, look at me, I'm an elm tree, look at me, I'm a, right? To me, when I watch all this stuff on YouTube, it's like 5, 6-year-old mentality, tops, maybe 8-year-old. Obviously, an 8-year-old has a higher pitched voice, smaller, these are adults with adult voices or whatever. But if you do a transcript and you go to a little school play where they have the kindergarten, second year, it's no different to me. But that's my perception. And I see what's going on. I see what they're being put through. They're not lying, but they're not competent enough to know what's going on.
So do you think
tell us what's going on? What is going on?
Do you think it's something happening as a simulation, like an advanced
Yes.
form of VR?
That's why I said earlier, we live in a reality. Okay. You ever run into someone who's broke and they say, as an analogy, I want a Ferrari. And 5 years later, you see him and he's like, he has a Ferrari. How'd you get the Ferrari? I don't know, man. Last time we talked, we were broke. I don't know. I just really wanted it. And somehow all these events happened and it felt, I got one, right? Anyone that's in business, if you have a really good business plan for 5 years, you will accomplish it in less than 3, every time. If you have a good plan, it usually happens much faster. Your intent and your desire actually affects your surroundings enough to make things happen. In other words, the impedances are removed and a vacuum, or it comes to you. Like, it's not law of attraction. It's different. There's no law about this. But there's an overarching picture. Okay, imagine people get on a cruise ship in England to go to New York. Everyone on the cruise ship is going from England to New York. But while you're on the cruise ship, which is like a small city, you have free will to do whatever you want. They have theaters, they have restaurants, you could sleep in your cabin, right? So what happens is we have intentions and desires, and we can manifest tremendous amount. But then there's the really big picture, which does not change for everyone. You see? So between those two, there's a group of people that have been here for a very long time. Just like I've said to Zen recently, the SSP is like this. Whether you believe it or not, when 500 years ago in the 14 and 1500s, when Columbus was doing his exploration, Magellan, there was no exploration, they knew. Vasco da Gama goes to the Cape, Magellan sails around the world and all that. 500 years ago, if you went out to the public, anyone, and talked about this, they say, get out of here. No one's doing that. That didn't make it to the history books till 200 or 300 years later. So right now, when you're talking about kilometer-long spaceships that are out in the solar system and all these other beings, you go tell the public, get out of here. Nobody, because 200 years from now, that'll be in the history books. Do you see what I mean? As fact.
Yeah.
But it'll be twisted.
I don't see SSP as conflicting with anything because it's just kept under wraps. It from every angle, and it's simply too huge.
Yeah, it is huge. And the reason why it's really huge is, let me just give you a little bit of something on this. Do you guys remember a few years ago, as I'm getting older, I say a few years ago, it could be 10 years ago, there was an article in one of these archaeological magazines, and it said that they found a cloned mummy. And someone sent it to me and says, look, they're going to clone a mummy. And I said, no, it doesn't say they're going to clone a mummy. It says that they found a mummy in Egypt, and this mummy is a clone. There's a difference. In other words, they had cloning technology 3,000 years ago. Do you see where I'm going with this?
They are after genetics. Are you referring to this group, the people that have been here for a long time, like you said? Please.
Okay, let me bounce around a little bit here just to, you know, when you're going to go run a race, you should warm up. You shouldn't do it cold, right? So I'm not going to get into the cloning cold because it's just too much.
I love that analogy.
Okay, so you'll warm up a little bit. So it's this person, 9 out of 10 people saw this article said, oh, they're going to clone mummies. I said, no, that's not what it says. According to the DNA, this is a clone. Okay, all right. Just like, for example, if I have an original picture and I go to a Xerox copy machine and make a copy, you can tell it's a copy, right, of a copy. Or let's say it gets even more obvious, right? Okay, we can get into how that's noticeable. Don't be baffled by the bullshit, the technical terms in medicine, DNA and all this other stuff. This can be done in simple terms that everyone can understand, but they don't do it because they want to keep everything separate. Okay, another thing. There was also a few years ago, there was a thing about skin grafting for burn victims. A university got all this money to develop it, right? So when people lose a tremendous amount of skin, it could be fatal. Actually, you can grow it back with light, by the way, and no scars, but that's another discussion if you understand that. Not hard to do. But anyway, skin grafting was I don't know if you guys remember, it was a little bit in the media about 5-6 years ago. Okay. So this news crew goes to this business that was doing the skin grafting. So they walk in, and the camera shows this table, a white table about 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, and it has several hundred flasks on it, glass flasks with liquid, and the table is rocking back and forth, moving. And they only show it for like a second. And the guy goes up to one of them with a tweezer, and he pulls it out, a piece of skin. It looks like chicken skin. And he puts it on something that looks like a cutting board, and he scrapes away a layer, and he holds up a translucent layer, and he says, this is what we want. And he says, well, how did you get that? He says, we took some genetic material, and we grow this skin. Now, let me just go back to what I just said. How do they grow the skin? It's just a table that you can go to anywhere, your grandma's table, and you put 4 hydraulic arms in each corner so it rocks it in a certain way, just so everything's moving, with some glass flasks with some plasma-based water type material, with genetic material, and it starts to grow. Where's the high technology in that? You can take tissue, genetic material, and have it in a certain fluid. I could get into the fluid. I was going to with the water, but that's another thing. As long as you have it moving, it will start to grow. Do you think society 3,000 years ago knew how to put liquid in a container and just keep it moving and grow tissue? Of course. That's how simple the skin grafting, the skin is grown. Of course, there's more to it. It's very subtle energy, right? That has to be applied. But basically, this can be found. Recently, I was having a discussion on cloning about a year ago with someone, and I found the skin grafts, and you can find it's a video, and they show you how they're making. It's just like, in other words, you can do this in your kitchen, right?
Okay.
You notice how whenever they show you technology, they always show you things that you cannot get yourself. Like I said, you can't be a regular string; it has to be medical approved, right?
To make it all special and seem so elusive, like we're this just underclass that will never get it. They want to make it seem like there's this bar to entry, which is all subject to licensure, which is what the Rockefeller people who worship death.
Well, also the people say the bankers run the world. Those are the clerks. They're the clerks, like in a low level.
Who are they the clerks of?
Okay, if you've ever heard of them or saw them or an article in history or heard their voice or on TV, they're not the power. They're the ones that the people in power put in front, right? So the cloning has been around always as long as mankind has been. It's very, very, very simple technology. Okay. One way to do it, you have to understand how the natural system works. It wants to live. It wants to, like, for example, you can go to a suburb in America and tell everyone to leave their house and come back. You know how the suburbs look with concrete sidewalks and driveways and
but you even it's there's regrowth and then that attracts.
Yes, if you leave any city, you don't do anything for 10 years, you'll come back, it'll look like a forest, right? There's so much life teeming. All planets, not just here. Well, everything.
We're allowed to know that weeds will come back, which will bring bigger plants, which will tree the bog and the tree down the valley. But we're not allowed to know that this, like you're harping on with this, skin will grow back, or this I guess gel state water will grow back.
Right.
We're allowed to know it in this capacity, but not that capacity.
Right. The gel state water, 39.4 or 4.2 Celsius is the anomaly point of water, meaning if you go above or below that temperature, the water expands, right? Water is, as you warm it, it expands, and as you cool it below that temperature, it expands. And I told this to a professor once. He said, no, it doesn't. I said, oh yeah, put a glass of water in a freezer. What happens, right? Oh yeah.
39.4 degrees?
Fahrenheit or 4.2 Celsius. You put that in an ovoid shaped vessel and you rotate the water with a silver impeller and you draw a vacuum. The vessel is sealed. You draw a vacuum, 2 inches of mercury, not much. Actually draw about 6 inches of mercury minus, vacuum. And then you inject some very high quality CO2 gas that has not come from the petroleum industry. So you end up still in a vacuum. So it goes from -6 to -2. And when you rotate that and you pulse it with a certain type of UV light that is not powered by 2 wires, only 1 wire, you release the water and you open the valve and the water's not coming out. And you start shaking it and something that looks like soft cheese comes out of the vessel. You put it in a glass and you hold the glass sideways and the water, like Jello, wants to flow out and it doesn't. And then once it hits the air and the light and you look at it, poof, it flows out on the table. Okay. So you drink this water, this gel water, you can actually, well, everybody close your ears. You can breathe this water too. You won't drown in it. Okay, let me go back. Then anyway, I've had people that have had this and they said, I have to call a cab. I can't drive home. I feel totally high and drunk. I'm hallucinating, right?
Are they being facetious because they can't handle reality, or it has some sort of
No, it has that effect because that's what the body does on the inside. You did it on the outside, and the body's like, wait a second, that's not supposed to happen until it passes the duodenum or the duodenum in the stomach. The duodenum is the drain hole in the stomach.
That's what we're told. That's what we're told,
Right. So I had a guy, there was a guy, he was an Israeli Mossad from Tokyo. By the way, the Tokyo Yakuza is the Israeli Mossad and the Persian mafia that run all the underworld in Japan. Anyway, it's just another story. But he got some of this water and he jumped up and he says, "You guys, you're lying. You're a liar, Greek." I said, "Why?" He says, "You put cocaine in this water." I said, "Well, first of all, how do you know what cocaine is like?" But anyway, I was like, "No, there's no cocaine in this water." So why would he say that? Everyone has a slightly different reaction. Right? So we put this equipment in storage, like a storage locker, and we came back and it was all gone. And I asked the people what happened. There's double padlocks. No one ever came here. They looked in the camera. There's nobody in the camera. Well, how come all the equipment's gone? Doesn't matter. That's the same with the med bed. If you don't know how to fish and I give you fish, you're in trouble. You might eat for a day, right?
Yeah.
If you don't know how the human body works, forget about med beds, forget about super drugs, forget. You know, there are drugs, there are sprays, injections, and pills you could take that will repair your body in a few hours.
Like what? Can we go over some?
Well, what we just mentioned, what happens with the water on the outside. No, that's a more introduction. What I want to do is go back to the existential question. We can go over it, but it's okay.
Can I just
Of course.
try to bring it around to, because this is a common thread between what I've heard from you and Penny Bradley and Radu Chinamat. It's that you all kind of hint to the fact that, well, everyone on Earth is insane, and that
Yes.
Radu Chinamar says that the influence of the reptilians, something like 100,000 years ago, led to our DNA being super specific and very the most physical, and
Yes.
this allowed other ET species to incarnate here to figure out for their own what they did wrong. And Penny adds the fact that initially it was just baby souls, but because species noticed they could drop in their criminal souls just as an exploit, so they did that, and now it's a 50-50 split. Does this resonate?
No, no, not at all, because I can give much more. In other words, yes, it's very broad. It's just like saying apples are red. But I've seen apples that are green, I've seen apples that are yellow. But your apples are red is not incorrect, right?
So it's more than just baby and criminal souls then?
Yes. Okay, where you are. For example, if you're in a submarine, it's really, really bad to fire a projectile weapon. If you're in outer space in a thin capsule, it's very bad to fire a projectile weapon for obvious reasons, right? You could damage the environment. When you're on Earth and you murder someone, you must be taken out. You must, in other words, blood for blood, eye for eye on Earth. Other places, not so. So where you are, your environment has its laws and its rules by whoever created it, right?
Who created this? Who created us?
Okay, well, that's even further down the line. You know, I would rather you ask me if you got any candy. I'm not being facetious, but I don't know exactly. We're not at this point. I don't know, but I have a really good idea based on the claimants. There's a big difference between creation and formation. And also there's a big difference between the soul and the spirit. You must define those things. If you lack the definition, you will be going around in circles like a child that one day wants a red fire engine and then wants a teddy bear and low-level immature things.
Can you tell us the distinction between them?
Yes, it's in your language. Everything is in your language. One of the codes, for example, is the word nice. Look up in etymology what the word nice means. Does anybody know what it means? Look up.
You had me look this up, yeah.
Have a nice day. You're a nice guy. Aren't we having a nice conversation? The word nice, look it up. It means foolish, stupid, senseless. It's like the word Jesus. People who use that do not know. The elite love that. They love it when you say, I'm taking blood pressure medication, you know. They love to hear that they're reptilian shapeshifters. They love that. They're laughing at it, right? Okay, so the same with the soul and the spirit. It's in the language. Okay, let's go very simple. The English language, there's no such thing, you know, there is, but it's made up of a lot of other cognates, like Greek, a lot of Greek words. Do you guys speak Greek? No, but you know at least 100 Greek words without knowing it if you speak English, right? It's kind of like President Bush. They asked him, for example, the French cannot be good at business because they don't have a word for entrepreneur, which entrepreneur is a French word. You see, so don't be like that. So, for example, the Greek psyche is the spirit, the mind. That's where you get the word psyche, psychology, psychopath. It has to do with the mind. What the mind is pure information. There is no physical counterpart. For example, if you have, let's say, a CD with the Beatles' White Album, and you give that to a CD to a materials analyst, and $400 a week later, he'll give you a report, 3 pages, and he'll give you the diameter, the materials in the disc, and all that. You say, do you see the Beatles music in there? He says, no. But you have to put it in an appropriate CD player, and now you hear the Beatles music, right? He cannot see the music. So the physical part is the body, right? So the spirit is the information. Just like if you take apart a hard drive, you don't see anything in there. You see a bunch of, or a vinyl record, you see dips and peaks, right? You don't see that. You need to play it on an appropriate thing. So it's information. The spirit, the human spirit is information. It's what makes you, you. And without the appropriate body, it goes into disanimation. Disanimation is like being asleep or in a coma. The soul is the animate part of the body. In Greek, the soul is the pneuma, the PNU prefix. So it means moving air, but it's not just moving air, it's the entire metabolism. Because if you suffocate someone, stop the air, they start to suffocate and the rest of the metabolism eventually shuts down. So the pneuma is where you get pneumatic, moving it, pneumonia, right? Whenever you see the PNU, that's the soul. And then you have the carne, which is the body, to incarnate, reincarnate, discarnate. Okay, so you have a physical body, which in stasis does not have to have a metabolism because it's in stasis. Once it's out of stasis and it's animated, it must have a metabolism, depending on the body, fluids flowing, intake, outtake, food, nutrition, all these other things, depending on the environment and the being, because there are beings that don't have to eat. Okay, actually here on Earth, there are salamanders that don't have mouths. Are you familiar with them in the deep caves?
Yeah.
Yes, they
Okay.
just got their gills just out like that.
Yeah, they expend it. Okay, so all right, so your soul is your metabolism. So, and your body is the physical part, and your spirit is who you are. So this is what happens. You're a physical body, carne, material, induction, inductive being, electrical, not electromagnetic, no, inductive, in a biological vacuum with a metabolism, which is the soul, and then that has a spirit. So let's go back to the soul. Also, anything that's alive, the soul is interchangeable. Like, for example, there was a dog that a gardener hit on the head. It was bothering, he was just playful. And this gardener hit the dog on the head with a shovel and the dog passed out, unconscious. I said, that's terrible. And they drove away. I go up to the dog, it's not breathing. So I put my hands around the dog's muzzle and I blew air into its mouth, still not breathing. I did it 2, 3, 4 times. And then the dog went, oh, and it started breathing. It got up, walked in a circle and ran away. What I did was I put my soul, my breath into that dog until its soul rejuvenated. Do you see? Your breath is your soul and your metabolism. If you have to do resuscitation on someone, you're putting your soul into their body until their soul is running their own self. And now your spirit is your mind. Your spirit is what makes you, your personality, you. That is distinct to you. That is your serial number. There's no one else or nothing else in the universe. Even if you met a copy of yourself in another universe, just like in Star Trek, they went to a parallel universe. You had the good Spock and the evil Spock, right? It's not you exactly. It's a version of you, like a splinter. I think they call it a shard of you, and those can be created, by the way.
Alters, yes.
Alters, yes. The spirit can be broken off, but just like you can break off a piece of a tree, let's say, right, and all these things, and graft it, right? You could break off a branch. Like I knew a lady, she had a really green thumb when I was in New York City. We walked through some of these lobbies. They have these exotic plants. And she goes up to the plant. She breaks off a little piece with a twig, just the right amount. She goes home and she grows her own plant. If I did it, I couldn't do it. I don't know how to, it would just die. But she had the ability to do that, you see? So to break off altars is not every, it is a specific way it has to be done, and through a certain psychic type, anyway.
And
Okay.
that too is kind of a fractal of the way that we are parts of higher beings, right? The way that
Yes.
the way that we split in
Yes,
parts.
let's say you go out and buy a Beatles White Album CD and you make a copy for your friend. There's a code in there, first of all, that they don't let you copy the CD, right? Sometimes. Now, if you can hack that code, when you make a copy, that CD will sound identical like the first one, very slight variation because of depending on the oversampling rate. If you have a good digital format reader, you can see that it was a copy because the sampling is different, but almost identical. And you could keep making copies digitally like that. Or analog is worse. Analog is much worse. When you have a tape from a tape, after the 3rd generation, it's unlistenable. That's why most people on this planet are unlistenable, because they're analog copies of an oppressive culture. Not government, not society. And I hate when I hear, by the way, this is not to go, I want to go back to several topics. The government did this, the government is abducted. No, there is no government. It's the state. Zana, we went over this with you. Yes, do you know the difference between the state and the government? They're not the same thing.
The state hijacks the government.
Right, every time.
And
yeah.
this have to do with the fringe around the
No, that's the army. The fringe around the flag is just the army flag. So when you go into a court, a lot of these patriots complain about the fringe. They shouldn't be complaining about the fringe. They should be complaining that the judge is in a black robe and he's out of uniform. He should be wearing a military uniform. That's the army issue. The army issue flag is a different proportion than the civilian flag. It's in Title 5 of the U.S. Code, or don't hold me to the titles. Just like I don't quote Bible verses, I don't quite.
Just recently, I have to, block
Codes.
people that leave all these comments. They're like, "Do you know what that fringe around your American flag means?"
Yeah, I just told you it's the American Army flag. That's all it is.
They
Army
have
regulation.
other different, version, but people just go off on them.
Yeah, the civilian. If you want to know what the civil flag of the United States looks like, go to the airport. It's red and white stripes, and it doesn't have a blue background with white stars. It's a symbol. It's a crest. It's a seal. It's white. You look up the civil, and it's hung vertically. And the reason they do it in airports is because they don't hang the U.S. flag, because that's a flag of war. And the last thing you want is an international airport, airplanes coming in to basically a militarized airport. They're not going to land. You have to fly the civil flag. You can see it in all the American airports.
Okay. Wait. So is it this flag right here? Let's see.
Just put in civil flag. There's several of them, but there's the main one
Okay.
that has the seal instead of the stars.
Oh, seal.
It's basically an eagle, which is another thing.
While he's looking, can I ask you if you think that there are infinite amount of timelines, or just the one that keeps resetting itself? It might have offshoots, but eventually it's going to decide, and it's going to lead to the same thing.
Both, and there's more. When we talk about the gods and all that, they are beings like us, but much higher superiority. Like we would be like a 3-month-old baby, and they would be like Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime.
But how do we reach that level, sir?
You are. You can't do it in this incarnation because the DNA will not allow it.
What kind of DNA will allow that, though?
You'll see. It will be a light-based DNA. Like, for example, let me get into this. I'll say it anyway. Remember years ago, there was a lot of talk about people getting the chip, right?
Right.
Well, now then there was talk about they don't have to inject you with a grain of rice size. It could just, you can inhale it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, do you know that there are chips that are gaseous? It's just a field of energy that they can imprint on your body with a cell phone tower. And you have an air bubble in your body. It's a gaseous field, and you don't even know it's there. And that's a chip. It records all the information. You know how the people talk about the akashic records, right?
Yes, I hear that all the time. Okay.
One possibility, the akashic records are actually stored in the noble gases, the helium and the argon, xenon. Those gases are noble. They do not react with anything else. The akashic record is stored in the noble gases and elements that do not have any chemical reaction with anything else to be corrupted. Right? Are you familiar with this or no?
Wow.
Once you understand transmutation, now we can go to the next level and discuss what these SSP people are trying to allude to.
Yeah, I agree. It's about getting the basics right first.
Once you understand the soul and the spirit, right? Like, for example, if I tell people your soul is interchangeable with a dog, they get offended because they don't know what it means. If I tell someone you're not nice, they get offended. I'm not nice. I hope I'm never nice. Do you see?
Yes. And you also, you stress this 7-year cycle, and then there are many other cycles, and that something will
yes. Okay,
unfold.
Hold on. There's a difference between a 7-year cycle and a 7-year period. I don't use the word cycle. I talk about periods. In other words, because we're in the credits portion, the time ended around 1998, and you have a 5-year period and then 4 7-year periods ending with a 3.5-year period. And we're the end of this 7-year period is 2025, which you're going to see a Middle East Union take over the world. Basically, it'll be the hub of power. That's what all this is about. I talked about this a long time ago. Starting in 2018 to 2025, by the middle, which is 2022, it'll be very clear that the West is going to be brought down. I talked about this a long time ago. It's on the Ocelli stuff, if you've heard it, right? Or are we referring to that?
Yes, and you mentioned something about the Antichrist.
Well, that's a different story. The Antichrist is not what people think he is. He's actually going to be very popular. He's right now, he was born in September of 1998. So how old is he now? 24? The main characteristic about him, genealogically, he's Assyrian, not Syrian, Assyrian descent, but he always claims to be of Judean descent. He has a false identity.
Where's this guy
And
hanging out? He's just living?
doesn't matter. You want to be like the movie The Omen, where the priest is looking for the son of the devil, right? You remember that movie? Anyway, to hunt him down. It doesn't matter. If you met him, he would be your best friend. You would love him. And if you met the biblical Messiah, you would hate the guy. I could hardly wait till this guy leaves. Right? Everything is backwards and inverted, right? What's going to be happening in the 2025-2027 period is a group of young people are going to start ruling younger and younger. And I said this in 10 years ago. You're going to see younger and younger rulers. Look at like Macron and Trudeau and all these, except for Biden. They're all very young, and Putin. Most of them are very young people. They're going to be in their late 20s, early 30s, rulers. I mean, the whole UN will be filled. Anyway, after 2025, they're going to say, the world's been in shambles. The system doesn't work. We need a new system. I talked about this, by the way, recently, years ago, decades ago. We need a new system, but we have to embrace these new laws, which are not new laws, they're very old laws. And I know in order to make things better, it's going to be a little drastic in the beginning, but everyone has to participate, okay? And everyone will say, okay, and they're going to be doing some crazy drastic stuff. There's also going to be a time reset, a year zero. This is another conversation, right?
What is the source of this, if I may ask?
Biblical, Hopi, Sumerian, the Rig Vedas. They're all
talking about the same thing?
Similar, but the biblical has the most information. I don't promote anyone read the Bible. You know why? Because after the word "the," you're not going to understand anything in it. I assure you.
Well, Trudeau and Macron and all these people, they all went to, Klaus Schwab's Young Global Leaders School.
Yes, well, that's going to go away. That's temporary. That's what. Remember, if you know about it, it's a front.
Mm-hmm. Is it true, or to your knowledge, this whole Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands and all that's the person who props up this Klaus Schwab guy?
That doesn't matter. That's like talking about, I don't know, McDonald's new. I don't mean to. Is McDonald's bringing back the McRib?
Yeah, I'm not offended. Look, I know half the shit I say, if not more, just is.
No, that's for the pot. That's surface level stuff. You have surface level stuff, which is physically on the surface, and then mentally on the surface that other people can relate to. Yeah, here's the thing. We're having this interview, and I've done other interviews and did the thing with Ocelli. I'm not a public speaker. I'm not a public person. I do what I do with materials and to help people and certain types of sciences and things that are not known on the surface, by the way. I'm not one to be speaking about alternative matters and tell people what's going on. What I would rather do is have someone else point to someone in the alternative media or even mainstream or academic and tell other people when they ask me, go listen to them, they've got it. But you know what? No one had. I assure you, nothing that we've spoke here or heard on is being mentioned by anyone else anywhere, other than references. It's pathetic.
Bits and pieces.
Yes, little bits and pieces.
Someone needs to go back and make like a best of compilation of all your Ocelli, because I think it's something like 30, 40 hours.
Yeah, I know, it's too much. Someone needs to go back. I have 3 banker boxes of notes, and the problem with it is one page will have like let's say something biblical, and the other side it'll talk about how to do gold transmutation in your kitchen, and the next one is completely different subject. So it's very hard to go through my notes for someone else too. I had someone doing it, and they were Xerox copying all my notes, and then the copies became single-sided pages that went categorical, much easier, right?
Right.
Because I tend to think parallel. There was a film documentary on Napoleon. It was in French a long time ago, and someone sent me a clip of that, said, this is you. And it was Napoleon. He was dictating 4 letters to 4 secretaries at the same time. One was to a general that left him, he wanted him back. The other one was 2 generals in the field, and one of them was to his sweetheart. And he looks at one person, he gives a sentence, he's dictating 4 letters to 4 secretaries at the same time. Very confusing to most people, right?
On that note, I heard that in the near future, humans will be able to do stuff such as write sentences at the same time upside down. This is a skill that we'll acquire.
Yes, I was speaking with Zan personally, and I said, if you're driving down the road, let's say at a good speed, and you see a big billboard on the right that has a company name what they're offering, a phone number, an address. Can you look at that for half a second and then look the other way and read that billboard? In other words,
No.
photographic memory, can you do that? See, most people have that ability, photographic memory, it's just that they're out of film, right? So how do you do that? I teach that to young children all the time. We're driving down the road pretty fast, and I see that real estate sign coming up? Yeah, I can't read it. Well, we just passed it. Did you get it? And the one person will get it. Yeah, I got it. It's Rob Lamb. The number is this, that. It's like, very good. In the beginning, you only get like the first word. In other words, imagine I show a flashcard with 10 words on it for half a second, and I put it down. You're going to get something. In the beginning, you're just going to get the color, then maybe a letter or two, maybe a word, right? But if we keep practicing like martial arts, you'll be able to see the whole thing. And then what we could do eventually, after a few years of this, I could have two.
Okay.
So we're at a thought. I was saying about everyone has a photographic memory. It's just most people are out of film, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, I want to go back to one more thing, because what's very important is the understanding how biology works, especially the human body, because I found out that most people spend most of their time in their body, right? And I mean that seriously. The ability to transmute, also the ability to understand water, can be also proven outside of the body by certain understanding intelligences of creatures around us, all the way down to the microbe. Give you an example. I used to go on calls and tell people how to grow gold in their kitchen. GOLDAU, you know the substance, gold?
Yes.
Okay, it's a biological gold, but it goes to the next level. Like when gold is formed on the earth, if anyone goes gold mining, other than when it's in the hard rock, you could see it's a crystalline structure, almost looks organic, like upside down melted wax, let's say, with tendrils and fingers. It grows off of the quartz in the presence of copper and silver. That's one way in the earth. That's how the earth does it. The way it's done biologically is very simple, that you can, I'm going to give this procedure and you will succeed every time. This doesn't make any sense to give only what you can do, because that's your personal talent. You always want to share things that anybody can technically access, right? Like giving you if I give you a recipe for a certain cookie that I have, it won't be exactly like mine, because no two loaves of bread are baked alike anyway, even in a factory, but it'll be very, very similar, okay? The same with this gold recipe. So what we do is we go and we acquire some baker's yeast that they use to make bread. And that species of yeast is a very common yeast. It's a Saccharomyces cerevisiae is the species. It's in a powdered form. So what you do is you want to create a liquid colony of the yeast. So you put it in some water, warm water, with some sugar maybe to feed the colony. And after a few hours, it starts to foam up, you can imagine. Brewer's yeast works well, but not as well as the Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is the baker's yeast. So far you've invested 50 cents or $1, okay? And the water and the sugar. So once the colony is formed, well, we know that silver is a fungicide and bactericide, okay? The metal silver. It doesn't have to be pure silver. And I could also talk about how to make aqueous argentum after this, remind me, because the colloidal silver they sell on the internet is a joke. You don't want a chemical one, you want an ethereal one. Okay, so we have the yeast in the jar. You want to keep it warm. You want to keep it at about 108 degrees Fahrenheit, because that's a high fever. If a human, the highest fever a human can stand is about 108. If you have more than that for a long time, you get rheumatic fever, you die. So 108, the top high fever, is a good temperature for this. So you take a piece of silver, a coin, or anything, and you hang it inside the jar, the vessel, somehow with a piece of string, so it's completely submerged in the liquid with the yeast. Now we know the silver is a fungicide to the yeast. The yeast colony then has an intelligence, and it sees that silver metal has been introduced to the yeast colony in the liquid. And it says, wow, this is going to kill us all. So we need a group of volunteers, maybe a third of the yeast, to go and bond themselves on a suicide mission to the silver. And when they bond their bodies to the silver, inside of their nucleus, they will start to produce gold and plate the silver with gold, because the gold is inert to us. I'm going to stop right there.
Is that's
how you make gold in your kitchen.
Have you done it?
Yes. I have another computer that has over 500 photographs. We've had it analyzed and everything. And there was a a guy that says, my daughter, she's in the 8th grade, want to do a science project. So we did that, and she did it in the science project. She even went and had the materials analysis at its goal. She gave the whole procedure. They failed her because the whole school, of course, does that. You cannot do something that is not in our physics books.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided to keep the failing grade for the whole year. She had to make it up, but at the last minute, they didn't put it on the report card. They gave her the regular grade. In other words, to shame her, but they didn't punish her ultimately. This is the society you live in.
Yeah, it's a growing shame. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Anyone can do this, and hopefully, the thing is, when you tell people how to do things or how things can be done, only 1 out of 100, 1% will actually do something, right? 100% of that 1% came back and said, Greek, it works. I've had people visit me here. They've traveled from all over the world, and they get on a Skype group, and they said, the Greek, everything he says is true. I've seen him do it. Now, the other people on the Skype group, yeah, we know. We didn't have to go there to see it. You see the difference?
And
some people have to see it.
Is this the first time you've shared this?
No, I've been sharing this for 15 years publicly. But only 1% of the people
know all this stuff. Who was your teacher?
Several, most of them are dead. No.
Why were you chosen, if you don't mind me asking?
I can't disclose that publicly because it's not time yet. Like, give you an example. When the Ocelli stuff that was done between 2015 and 2017.
Yes.
Okay, I was told around 2010 to wait until that time. Now I'm being told I have to wait till before 2025 for the next round. There was a couple of people that approached me around 2010, 2011 to do what I did in 2015, 2017. I said, no, it's not time yet. And I'm not even going to mention them. I think I mentioned one of them. I don't want them mentioned. They're very popular. Everyone, if I mention their name, everybody knows them. Mm-hmm. Million followers plus. And there are some people. Anyway, you have to give things at the right time. Okay, give you the analogy on this. And then remind me about the silver, because this really helps. How to make it will destroy anything that the body creates. By the way, there's no such thing as a contagion. You induce, even if you look at health documents, the disease, it's contracted because you have a contract with the medical corporation. Get it? That's what the AIDS is, by the way. If you have, like they said, something spread out of a lab or whatever, that's impossible. It doesn't matter if you had 10,000 vials of whatever, you could spread it on the people. A few people will get sick. It will never spread, whatever. It's the same thing as vomiting or shitting on them. That's not how it works. You have to have an induction thing. And I'm not going to get into that publicly. I will in the future, let's say. And no one who wants to know how to create a plague, email me either, please. But I can discuss it. The silver is the same way. There's a tonic, you can make several tonics that will just, there's no measurable material in there, but it has the effect, kind of like homeopathic medicine, if it's done right. By the way, the homeopathics that are put out there, none of them work. It doesn't mean homeopathic, let me say it this way. If you put out homeopathic medicines, they do work, but 1%, 5% max. If you put out a real homeopathic tonic, you would be dead in 3 days. If they found out, the establishment found out, you would be in very big trouble. It would be like, there's plenty of people that run their cars on water, but they don't tell anyone. But if you went out and started telling anyone how to do it, not with hydrogen electrolysis and other things like that, you would be in very big trouble very quickly. Or free energy machine, right? Yes. Very big. Free energy machines are very easy to do, by the way. Not very easy. They're simple. They're actually not easy, because it's much more reliable to be on the grid, because certain devices rely on certain aspects of cosmology and they stop working at 3 in the morning, right? And then you might be able to start them again by 10 in the morning, but sometimes you have to wait a month. That's why Zan, you and I said, everything on the internet's bullshit. Not everything, but to find the stuff that is not BS, you know how you find a needle in a haystack? With a magnet, really fast, right? You don't have to keep moving everything, right?
What would be our magnet, not in an analogous form?
Well, when someone shows you an asshole made of paper, you show up with a blowtorch. What happens?
Shows you an asshole.
The asshole disappear. Anyway, when you put paper and fire together, they burn really quickly, right? But if you wrap up a piece of metal or gold in paper and you don't know what's in it, you just put the fire and the metal shows right away, right? In other words, it's a brutal process. To find out what's true on the internet, you have to be brutal, intellectually brutal. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You also have to know the codes. They put out codes all the time on what's BS. The people doing it don't know, but they don't know any better, right?
Right.
You go to, let's say you go to a society, we're going to talk about the silver and a few other things. We go to a society of headhunters, and they have their shrunken head is the most valuable possession. The way you make a shrunken head is when the person is killed, you remove this facial skin very carefully, and the skin shrinks, and without a skull, it's very small, and it still has the likeness of the individual. It's a shrunken head. So these headhunters, cannibals, they have prized these shrunken heads. So we go there with a translator, us three, and we grab a headhunter and we say, does it bother you that you have 3 shrunken heads in a bag? And he looks at you and he says, you know, nobody's ever asked me that question, but yes, it does bother me. You say, why does it bother you? Because my brother, he has 20 shrunken heads in the bag. Oh my goodness. If you brought that person in this society, he would be criminal, wouldn't he? But if we went over there, we would be criminal because we want to bury the dead. We don't want to eat them. So what are you doing throwing away good food? So which one is right? Which one is wrong?
It's all subjective.
Yes, but there is the one who, the creators and the formers give you the law. For example, when you go buy a car and the manual says use 89 octane only, or use 10W30 only, oh, it doesn't matter. They made the car, they engineered it. I don't care. I'm going to put whatever I want in it. You can do that too, but there will be consequences, right? Like when Mitsubishi in the early 90s started the first mass production company to put out synthetic only vehicles, oil only, and people were taking them to Jiffy Lube, the cheap oil places, and putting crappy oil, and they're all burning oil and blowing smoke. And they said, oh, these cars are no good. After 2 years, there's black smoke that comes out. It's because no one read the manual. You see?
Yes.
So
And
what you want to do, let's give you an example. Let's say we want to rent an apartment, and it's 20 of us as roommates. It's a big apartment, okay? And we're going to go meet the landlord to sign the lease. But not all of us are going to go. We're going to send Daniel. He's the smartest here. So he's going to go sign the lease. So the lease is really this long agreement, and he comes back and he doesn't tell us like he leaves out 90% of what's in the lease agreement. And we start living there and doing these things that the lease says we shouldn't be doing, but we don't know we shouldn't be doing them. And we find that the landlord's coming in and saying, what the hell are you doing? You got to leave. And we're like, why? What's wrong with you? Well, it's in the lease. I don't know. See, Daniel didn't tell us that's what the priesthoods didn't do to the people. You see, when they communicate with these higher beings, they didn't tell the people what the rules were. And then it got so bad that they have to be evicted. That's another, and this is like the mothership show up and everybody makes peace analogy. This is like the headhunter analogy. You see?
although there is such thing as karma, and
No, there
not
isn't.
been
I disagree.
Oh.
I'm going to stop you there. There is no karma. Karma is a terrible thing. It's dharma. Well, that is a low-level spiritual application. There is no. I disagree with that personally. And actually, if you go back and look where that comes from, it is not the way that it's popularly accepted.
Well, karma would signify balance, right? And I mean,
Right.
there's bad things that happen to good people and good things that happen to bad people. I mean, like, look who's controlling us right now.
There's a cosmic momentum. There's a cosmic momentum. If you're a bad person, I know this is very harsh. I'm going to say it anyway.
Say it, damn. Come on.
If you're a really bad person doing bad things, you better just do that to the end of your life. You could repent right before you die. But the moment you stop doing those in the middle, all those things you did before are going to fall down on your head, and you're going to end your life right there. There's no karma. What's the karma for a piranha that goes and eats all the creatures and viciously or whatever?
Yeah, I always thought that people would always say there's karma. And Daniel, I'm not saying this to gaslight you at all. I just felt this way. And also, when people want to say, I hate you, everything happens for a reason. No, it fucking doesn't. Or like,
well, no, the reason is the same reason it happens that everyone on the boat is going from London to New York. You cannot change that. But everyone in the boat, you're free to do what you want there. But it depends on who you have allegiance to. That's another, this is more on a spiritual side. The spiritual, the mind, the way the mind works, there's many levels to it. There's a low-level mind, there's a mid-level mind, and there's a high-level mind. The high-level mind can tolerate the mid-level mind, but cannot tolerate the low-level mind at all. The low-level mind can tolerate the mid-level mind, but cannot tolerate the high level. If you put a person who is very spiritual or whatever and is very knowledgeable in the middle of the Super Bowl, everyone there would want to kill them. You know, the audience, because the low-level mind, yes, I'm saying that people that go to football games are a low-level mind. Yeah, there's very few exceptions.
Never been into football, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so the low-level mind despises the high level and the high despises the low. The mid-level is resistance on both sides, and the middle stays in the middle as a buffer. If you read where karma and dharma come from in the original notions, it's basically this. If you grow up in a family where you're a shoemaker, you have to be a shoemaker. If you go outside of that and become a farmer, you have bad karma now. This is in the original text. This is like what the word nice means, right? This is like the things we discussed in the human body. You can do whatever you want. You could say that whatever. Yeah, people do that all the time. You're free, but it has nothing to do with the origin and the fundamental, you know, what's been preserved about it. There are bad beings that do bad, and they should keep doing bad as long as they exist. Not because it's good for them to do bad, but it's good for them to be that way because that's how they're supposed to be, you see.
But why is it bad for them to stop being bad?
Because the repercussions are going to be even worse.
From whom?
Depending on the environment again. Like, for example, on the earth, if you murder, if you spill blood, because you're on the earth, your blood has to be spilled. Otherwise, the earth stacks up a negative retaliation towards you later. Now, if you're on the moon, it's probably different. But on the earth, it's that way. Just like if you're in a submarine, not only are the weapons locked, but they're empty, and the ammunition is locked away because you don't want to start shooting machine gun in the side of a submarine, right? It's very, very bad, right? But it's different. If you live on the farm, you can have your gun loaded everywhere you want, anywhere. It's okay if it goes off, right? It's all right. You're on a farm. So the good and the bad depends on who you are, when you are, and where you are. Like, let me just go back to the biblical stuff real quick. People think there's a different God from the New Testament to the Old Testament. That's a moron. It's an idiot that just follows whatever religion they put on whatever out for you. A lot of people use that the Old Testament God was evil because they went and killed all the Canaanites. Oh, hell yeah. Hell yeah. Of course they would. You had to. Let's say the three of us went into an old Canaanite village when the Israelites, before they went in. We're walking in the village, right? And you see a shop, and these animals are tied down. This is a rated G. Everybody can see this. Why are these animals tied down? Oh, that's a sex club. In the middle of the day, yeah, they have donkeys tied down, sheep, chickens, any animal you want. You pay and you go ahead do it with the animal. Okay, let's go further over. These little dirty children, they let not kept at all. They're naked in cages. What are these for? Oh, these children here, they're for sale for the sacrifice, because if you don't want to sacrifice you buy one. The poor people give them up all the time. Oh, what's that smoke at the end of the street with the bells? Oh, that's Moloch. So the people that can afford the child, they put the Moloch is a statue. It's red hot. It's got a big belly. It's red. And the child sits in its lap and it burns alive. And you make a wish of prosperity, like Santa Claus is red, and you ask Santa, what do you want for Christmas? Right? And remember, this is an open market. So the child being burned alive is a blood-curdling scream. So they're ringing bells to drown out the scream, loud jingle bells. You see where I'm going with this?
Oh, Santa
You see
Claus.
how sick the society is?
Yeah, Santa Claus. You're talking about our Christmas tradition.
It's not mine. Hell, that's another code. That's code again.
I didn't mean
January 1st, Christmas. All right, let's go back to it. Remember we said timekeeping should be astronomical. So in the biblical text, if you want to put something, you can't use a calendrical system because, you know, Stalin had a 20-day month and a 20-hour day. Actually, on eBay, you could still go buy watches with 20 hours and calendars for 20 days from the Stalin Soviet period. You could still get those. The Mayans also had a crazy calendar like that. None of that was lawful. But anyway, if you want to restore a calendrical date, you have to do it using astronomical bodies. So the biblical Christ, it gives a vision. It's in Revelation. It's the constellation Virgo. It's in the west. the sun in the middle, the moon at her feet. We know it's a crescent moon, the middle of the month, and the draconian stars at her head. Well, if you have 2 objects, you can get the year and the month. 3 objects, you can get the year, the month, and the day. In this case, you have 7 or 8 objects. If you count the stars in the constellation, you can get it down to the minute when the Christ was born. So we know that constellation happens roughly every 14 or 17 years. And we know, according to history and the biblical text, that was when Augustus Caesar did the census of the Roman Empire, and the current records show it was between 8 BC and 6 AD. So we have to look astronomically that astronomical alignment, the constellation Virgo in the west with the moon at her feet and the sun in the middle and the draconian stars at the head, did it happen around that time? So we go to the Astronomical Observatory and he says, yes, it did. So he shows you, he does the alignment, and he shows it happened 3 BC on the month of September on the day of 11 at 6:40 p.m. Oh, September 11th. So that was a birthday party for, I get it. Why was it a birthday party for the biblical Messiah? Because when they asked him, are you coming to bring peace? What did he say? The biblical Christ, think not I come to bring peace. I come to bring the sword between father and son, daughter and mother-in-law, brother and brother. I am here to bring terror amongst you. That's the biblical Christ and the historical one, not the Christian one. Now, the Illuminati or the elite that did not know this, that was a birthday gift, that birthday thing that they did. How many people are saying, how many people? Because they don't know how to keep time. They don't know anything, right? Makes too much sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. This is just something I heard, but regarding the karma thing, what kind of sold me is that, going back to the SSP, that I heard there is such a thing as a court from the Galactic Authority who is far above even the Draco, and they try people. In the case of the solar system, it happens on Saturn, and even like Marduk, they have to answer, and the way they're judged is based on whether they went against the consent of others. So that's how I saw karma, as going against consent. But I don't know if you even believe in consent, judging from the fact that you said that we hardly have any free will.
No, you do have free will depending on the setting. For example, you know that we have a lot of free will on the cruise ship. We could do anything we want, but everyone on the cruise ship is going from London to New York, you see? That free will you do not have. But the captain of the ship, he can turn the ship around, right? So he has a higher level of free will. It has to be free will. For example, let's go back to the biblical text. There's no conversion. You know how the Christians go around try to convert people? No, that's a big no. The reason the Elohim work on all free will. The word free will and a volunteer and offering, it has to be free will offering, or you have to come to it freely, is hundreds of times in the biblical text. It's also hundreds of times in the Rig Vedas. And then you have to understand selflessness. Even the Bodhisattva, when he attains, let's say, perfection, he must, the Bodhisattva turns around to come back and help others instead of continuing being selfish on his own, right? So there's different types of free will. There's the free will if you're selfish, and there's the free will if you're selfless to help others, right?
Right.
You see? So there's many levels of that. Yes, there is a very, very high council, but they're also brutal, very brutal. In other words, when judgment is cast and it's time for sentencing, it's very brutal.
It's
right?
black and white.
It's black and white, and it could mean destruction, but it's usually not complete destruction. It's possible, but things seem to be recycled and brought back. Yes.
This one person's account goes into detail about how this galactic authority is actually banishing 1 trillion Germans that have used time travel to colonize a lot of planets in the Sagittarius arm of the galaxy.
Okay, you can't travel in time. You can travel to past and future events somewhat, because time is just the recordation of events. It's just what you have on your logbook, right? So when you hear time travel, you have to think of going to past and previous events. There are several levels to that. Do you know how we discussed earlier, when the bicycle wheel is not moving, you could put your hand through it anywhere, but once it's moving, it'll cut your fingers, it'll seem solid, right?
Yep.
Okay, that's how time travel works. It's the same way. You're manipulating the thing that is stitching our reality together to show you what it has in its memory banks. You know how you have a history on your computer? You could see all the websites you went to unless you clear it. So when you're going through time travel, you're accessing that, but just physically. You know the Mandela effect? That's real, but it's happening on a bigger level than people are discussing. Most of the Mandela effect discussions are people coming to awareness of things that were always there. I've seen, I said, no, I remember that. You were just not aware of it because our awareness is being heightened right now. Our awareness is being heightened for the same reason that, do you know when you have an accident, while the accident is happening, time seems to be slowed down and everything's in slow motion?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
The reason why awarenesses are going up is because your DNA, let's just say, your essence, you know it's over, and you're going to get a baseball bat across your head in the next, I'm not going to say, well, less than a decade now. So all of a sudden, everything's slowing down and you notice a lot more. When you're falling or in an accident, you're noticing everything that's happening in real time, but it's slowing down. That's what's happening for society. It's very typical.
So, Greg, we have this horrible event that's about to happen to the surface population here soon that you're keen on.
No, not soon.
Well,
It's, in other words, if you know it's happening, it's soon. But if you don't know the specifics, it's never going to happen and you're going to deny it. Because you're going to fall for the propaganda, the rhetoric, that we all have to get together to do these things that are a little harsh to set us on a new foot. And we're going to have 1,000 years of peace and prosperity. And they're going to produce it also. They're going to produce things that are, to show peace, to show the poor being helped, to show certain technologies, right? And the people are going to fall for it, just like they fell for this last thing, right?
Well, Greg, how do I not be part of the problem? How do I usurp just a life of meaning?
No, there is no problem. It's how do you change your destiny? It's possible. Like there's something called the Book of Life, and it's edited. There's people's names that are put in there, right, to be part of the spiritual elite, but they could also be taken out, right? Are you familiar with that, Daniel? There's a list of people that are incarnated to have a certain position here, but they could be, it gets edited constantly. It's called the Book of Life. Those that'll be granted high privilege later. You could be, before you were born, in there to be granted high privilege later when you're reincarnated. But if you can do things here, or they change their mind, they could take you out of it.
Who's they?
Or those that are not in it can be put into it last minute, right? Okay, so what you're saying basically is you don't want to be in the trap. So, knowledge, avoidance of a trap is knowledge of its existence. The only way a trap is if you don't know that it's there. But if you know that it's there and you go into it, it's not a trap, it's a tragedy.
Oh, yeah.
See, the difference between misfortune and tragedy, that's why all these false flag events are called tragedies, because they knew they were coming. A tragedy means you knew it was bad, but you went ahead with it anyway, right? Like the Greek tragedies. Like, why are they called the Greek tragedies with Medea and all that? Because when you read the old Greek tragedy stories, it's like, let's say, 50, 60-page story. In the first chapter, they tell you everything that's going to go down and how they're going to die in the end. And everybody in the book knows it. But they go ahead with it anyway.
Yeah, 9-minute warning, by the way, just so y'all know. We have 9 minutes.
But Leslie, about this, you also mentioned the people who will depart, that they will still be around afterwards. And in what form did you mean?
Okay, there's a long, in this physical form, but different again, because the Earth will be subject to tremendous changes. It's going to grow in size. I'm not going to get into the, what would you call it, when you change the surface of a planet completely, what is it called?
Terraforming.
Terraforming. Yeah, the Earth is going to be re-terraformed. It's going to be universe central. You know how you have Grand Central Station, like a main hub where all the trains go? In Berlin, there's one. In England, there's one. The Earth is going to be a main hub for all the cosmic beings, or most of the cosmic beings in this universe. But not now, in 1,000 years from now. But it's going to be like a construction project. But in the meantime, the humans are going to be allowed to develop self-policing and outside policing also by high-level spiritual beings and ETs. And this is all going to start in about a decade. So, and it's going to start in the Middle East, where you know how people say what goes around comes around? Okay, when you look at a racetrack of a car or a horse racetrack or something, can you visualize the starting line? You see right? Visualize that? The starting line on a racetrack? Let me ask you, where's the finishing line?
It's the same place.
Exactly. So the known history that we have and all of the attributes that go back, where did everything kind of start with the Sumerian gods and the Akkadians
It
and the
was all in
Babylonians,
the well, at least in
Middle
the
East?
epoch.
Okay, where do you think it's all going to end?
Mesopotamia, the Tigris River,
Yep,
all
that's where it's going to end. This particular cycle, yeah. And it is a cycle, but each one is different. Watch, okay, well, how do you know this is going to happen? There's going to be a civil war in Iraq, and it's going to split north-south, and a new country is going to be formed called the New Assyria, and it's going to take land from Syria and Turkey. Before the Syrian conflict started, years before, I said, watch Syria. There's going to be a conflict there to loosen it up, so when Syria is formed, it'll be easy to grab that land, and also Turkey, right? Very simple.
So this is all fated.
Yes, it's fated, yeah, and you can't change it, but your perception, you'll ignore it. So in other words, if I tell people what's coming with accuracy, within a pretty accurate also, they say that's never going to happen. And when it happens, and I say, see, I'm not one to say I told you so, but some of us, remember I talked to us, oh, so what, Greek? It was natural, you know. You were just lucky. I said, really? I have 150 things I went down with specifics, so I'm just lucky.
The validation because they're dumb and too proud.
They're cosmically censored. There's censorship and there's cosmic censorship. In other words, it comes from very, very high up cosmic authority. If they don't want you to see something, it doesn't matter what you do, they cannot see it. I'm sure you run into those people all the time.
How come I feel like I'm one of the very few that is just dying to hear everything you have to say? That's what I don't get. You have all these answers.
Well, it's not what I have to say, because I'm dying to hear what you have to say once you kind of, you know, come to this a little bit and start working it, right? In other words, what I'm doing is, you guys don't know how to cook, and you go shopping with me, and I show you, and I make this delicious meal, and you're like, Greek, this is amazing. Should you go cook? Yeah, but you know what? You can cook too. You just have to understand the properties of celery or how to make good rice. By the way, I did a few audios on how to make delicious food, which has nothing to do. You could watch 1 million cooking shows. You're not going to learn how to cook, right? So, or buy 1,000 cookbooks. You're still not going to learn how to cook. I broke down all the missing stuff. And whoever, I still get emails even recently, Greek, it's amazing. I went over the food video that you did, and I never made potatoes and rice and this and that, and meat so delicious.
I remember last time we talked, you said you were putting some rosemary and butter or something on some porterhouses there.
Rosemary, lavender, and thyme. I have a lavender bush. Lavender, like lavender shampoo, you know, that's a plant. You know, it looks like a pine needle. Yeah, just a little bit combined with some other. It just opens out. It's just the olfactory, and when it hits the taste buds, it's like, it's really delicious, but people don't know what it is, right? Because they don't think of cooking. Yeah. Also soups, like I could make the most delicious soups in the world. Very simple. You just put half of the soup in a blender, make a puree, add a little heavy cream. And people are like, this is the most delicious soup I have. Really, it's a real basic soup. Let me show you how to do it. Just put half the soup in the blender or a hand blender and add some heavy cream, and everybody will say it's the most delicious, instead of like stuff floating in liquid.
Yeah, yeah, like a vegetable soup or some sort of soup.
Yeah, but you can do that. Yeah, it's I have very simple baking. Do all your baking stovetop. You don't have to fire up a big oven. It's a lot of energy. You're wasting time. Do it on the stove. I'll show you how to do it on the top. Anyway.
Great. Can I ever meet you in person?
Yeah, sure. I'm not supposed to. Okay, let me just share something that.
In 3 minutes.
I'm not supposed to. Okay, I'm not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be talking to you or anyone.
I do feel like it's.
But I am,
because it's just so like I feel like I'm forever indebted to you, Greek.
Yeah, I'm like go to a highway and you have an Amazon truck that's delivering stuff from the East Coast to the West Coast, and a box happens to fall off in Texas. Yes. And a bunch of people open it up. Says, that's not supposed to be here. It fell off the truck. It needs to go over there.
It's out of time.
Yeah, I'm in the wrong place. It's no different than taking someone from the future and bringing them here. By the way, you know what happens when you bring someone from the past to the future here in this time period? Let's say the three of us are in a room right now, and I was able to bring someone, not me, but let's just say, from 500 years ago. What's the first thing they're going to be freaked out about? Not the you'll show them the wall and the switch, the microwave and the radio. They'll be amazed for about 2 minutes. But when they go outside, they're going to see something that for days and days and days they will never get over. What is it?
How dumb people are?
No. Asphalt on the roads.
Okay.
Why are you taking asphalt? Why are you taking pitch that comes from the earth and spreading it all over the ground? It's a bad thing to do. They'll never get over that.
Well, okay, 2 minutes. Why is asphalt so bad?
Because in the older cultures, it had a very stark representation of certain things. Let me give you an example.
Not goo.
Many environmentalists say if you dump toxic things down the drain, you get in trouble, right? You get a fine.
Yes.
Do you know how much dioxins and formaldehydes and things drain off the asphalt road when it rains? You drink that water, you will die off the asphalt road. It's super toxic, and you're spreading it everywhere.
That's crazy.
That's the first thing. That's how you know if someone's been in the presence of someone that's been plugged from the past into the. I'm not going to. Anyway, stop.
Well, yeah, look, let's just wrap things up.
Let's wrap it up.
Daniel, Greek, thank y'all so much. Greek,
Thank you.
Appreciate it, man.
Thanks.
And now, Greek, real quick, I have your permission to put these 5 interviews on YouTube. Am I correct?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Also, too, I'm sure Daniel wouldn't mind going through and consolidating all of the interviews you've done to just have like a chronological, you know, I'm sure
I've done that. I've done that before. Yeah, I can do that.
I didn't know.
Wow, you're quite the guy.
For him on his behalf, but would you be okay if Daniel did that?
Of course.
Okay, cool. Then it's settled. Greek, call me whenever. I'll post this within a day or so. And seriously, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, man.
Okay, you're welcome, guys. Thank you again.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Ciao.
All right.